Badlands. Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
We were sleeping. I've been sleeping. I've been turning away from a truth I wanted not to face. There is a wound that won't heal at the center of the galaxy. There is a darkness reaching like rust into everything around us. We let it grow, and now it's here.
How many men have you killed, my lord?
I don't know.
50? 100? Countless.
Countless has a nice ring to it.
And how many lives have you saved?
500,000. Population of King's Landing. Tell me if your precious Randy commanded you to kill your own father and stand by while thousands of men, women, children burned alive, would you have done it? Would you have kept your oath then?
Our time has come. We prepared. We grew stronger. While you rested in your cradle of power, you were trusted to lead the Republic. But you were deceived. You assumed no force could challenge you. And now, finally, we have returned.
The visions are clear now. I see possible futures all at once. Our enemies are all around us. And in so many futures they prevail. But I do see a way. There is a narrow way through.
It's not a prophecy. It's a story that you keep telling, but it's not their story, it's yours. They deserve to be led by one of their own. What your people did to this world is heartbreaking.
We gave them something to hope for.
That's not hope!
We have survived by hiding from them, by running from them. But they are the gatekeepers. They are guarding all the doors, they are holding all the keys, which means that sooner or later, someone is going to have to fight them.
I wish none of this had happened.
So do all who live to see such time, but that is not for them to decide. All we will have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us.
Forgive me. I did not see. I have failed you all.
You will bring me. Captain John, I do not know what strength is in my pet. But I swear to you, I will not let the White City fall. Our people failed. Our people. Our people.
I wish you good fortune in the wars to come. And now it begins.
No. Now it ends.
What's up, guys? Welcome to The Narrative, episode 47. It's been a good little run of numbers. We had episode 45, the original DJT. Episode 46, our boy Blue, who is my favorite fake president, personally. You could argue all the presidents are fake, but he's my personal favorite fake president. And you must admit you miss him. You miss that guy. Things are getting squirrely out there. And I would say that the Our Boy Blue era was at least a funny comedy. And I think the shenanigans going on right now are just kind of more annoying. We might be able to find some humor in them, but he was the funniest of all the fake presidents. And you guys miss him. You just admit it that you miss him. So we're probably not going to talk about that tonight. But episode 47, the return of Trump. which is ironic because I'm not having an American on tonight. But I named this episode Arctic Alliance. This is something I've touched on. We've touched on, at least on this show, a few times. I've touched on it in my writing a bit. A lot of it was influenced by my guest tonight, Matt's writings, many of which I've published on the Badlands Substack, which, by the way, guys, go to badlands.substack.com. It's totally free over there. If you want to support us monetarily, you can, just like anything else, but it's free. There's the brief 5 days a week. Ehret's one of our features writers who's always putting this stuff out, and he often gives me good topics to mine for these shows. We're probably going to go over the 28-point peace plan tonight. We're going to spend about an hour on each point in the plan. So that should take us to about Tuesday morning is the aim. Otherwise, yeah, we're going to talk about U.S. and Russia. That's the theme tonight. It's not going to shock anybody. But after hitting some current stuff, second hour, I want to get into the Arctic Alliance, kind of the idea, what's going on in the Arctic now, what was supposed to go on in the Arctic in the past, what could go on in the Arctic in the future. And Matt has a lot of great insights on all of that stuff. And I think it's one of the sort of rabbit holes in the info war and in history that very few people know about, very few Americans know about it. And I actually think it's hugely encouraging for the future. So we will get into that. Before I bring Matt on, and third part of the show, I'm going to probably let Matt go and not keep everybody for 3 hours every time. And then I'll do some rants about some stuff. Trump's being kind of funny out there tonight. So I'll hang out with you guys. If you want to support the show, send over a Rumble rant, send over a boost. I saw a couple of those that I will get to in the third hour. And I hope a bunch of you have received, well, I know a bunch of you have received the Swordpunk book. Not all of them have delivered. I think there's like 30 outstanding or something like that. So don't freak out until Thanksgiving arrives, and then you can just completely freak out about whether or not you received the book. So thanks for supporting that project. And our show sponsor tonight, our main show sponsor, is our friends at Tamarack Gardens, who I've now met at 2 garts in a row. Are you looking for a better alternative to the over-the-counter drugstore medications? Tamarack Garden began from a parent's desperate need for safe and effective options for their kids. Tired of toxic chemicals taking matters into their own hands, they began crafting medicine from weeds, wildflowers, and herbs, the original time-tested healers that modern medicine can't match. Packed with antiviral herbs to boost immunity and fight illness, Tamarack Garden has, for a limited time, their elderberry and rose hip syrup kit available. Not only is it delicious, no more battles with kids, and easy to make, it will keep you and your family healthy all fall and winter. Introducing Tamarack Garden's new baby line, clean, non-toxic, and gentle for newborns and moms, relieving cradle cap, diaper rash, stretch marks, and postpartum pain. Go to tamarackgarden.com today. Use the promo code Badlands for $10 off orders over $50. That's 20%. $10 on orders over $50. Remember to eat your weeds. tamarackgarden.com, promo code Badlands. And like I said, I've met them. Mrs. Wright is the one who uses a lot of naturopathic stuff. And if we can give any endorsement, I think the fact that we literally apply their products to the skin of our infant, it tells you that we trust them. And it's all natural stuff. And they also bought my book. So, they get an extra gold star for that. All right. I will bring him on now. As always, any filibustering at the start of the show, it is the unsigned agreement all guests make with the narrative, does not count as their time on the narrative. And the look of fear I can see backstage and regret creeping across Matt Ehret's face is why I do this. Anyway, Matt Ehret, I think this is your third time, maybe fourth time on the show.
Yeah, I don't know. My math skills suck. I like writing, but I avoid numbers in general. Yeah. I just stick with the words. Yeah,
too much is probably what you feel like, but because But anyway, man, how's it going? We've got some fun stuff to talk about tonight. How you been?
Yeah, absolutely, and congrats on the book release. I'm sure I'm sure I'm not sure about anything, but I sincerely hope that it makes it to their homes before Christmas time. That's a big deal.
It
I
has been. We were very nervous about it because Mrs. Bright did almost nothing. I basically did all this work. I packaged all these books very expertly, and hoped that the intrepid stalwarts of the United States Postal Service would do their part, and it seems like they are. So,
Okay.
like 80% of the books have delivered, and everyone's like, "Yeah, they're still books when they arrive." So
Good,
that's good.
good. I've been I bit off what I hope is not more than I could chew because for the last like I think 3 months ago I mentioned to you when I was doing that whole series on why real patriots don't think like Hitler. I did like
Yep.
7 or 8 segments to it, and I told you my plan is to just write maybe one last segment, and then I'm gonna wrap it all up and make it a book and just sell it. Hope like way before Christmas. This is like three
Oh
months
yeah,
ago. I'm
yeah.
talking,
Of
but
course.
then that last damn chapter became just I want to say the gift that keeps on giving or the curse that keeps on cursing, but I just keep
Yep.
everything you scratch on. It takes it through another rabbit hole, and the story is damn big. So now I'm like racing to like tell the tale so that I can just wrap it up, and I'm running out of time because Christmas really is coming, and so I've got to get it done fast. But I'm sweating. It'll happen though.
Yeah. Yeah, man, that's like one of those writer's curses. I actually had a feature. I published a feature on my Substack today, all about Saudi Arabia, and in the context of the Sovereign Alliance stuff that I talk about a lot, and that was supposed to be like one piece of a feature I've been working on, or at least planning for like a month now. And I'm like, oh, I'll just start that big feature I've been working on. And then after I got 4,000 words in, I'm like, I guess I just need to publish this and name it something different. And now it's just like a prologue for that feature. And that's my secret, guys. Every feature you've probably ever read from me was the beginnings of the thing I was going to write. And I was getting warmed up with that feature. But someday I will write a feature I've actually been planning to write. I think there's many such cases with people like us.
Yeah, if you don't start, it'll never happen. But I mean, it always kind of surprises. That's what's kind of nice about this is like the general idea that you want to get across, but then you don't know what it's going to look like because you haven't
Right.
fully discovered it yet. You're just kind of leaning into the unknown. And I know that if you don't start writing, it'll never work. It'll just like it's like eating energy bars and not moving.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
just like it gets harder and harder to move because you just
Right.
do more and more research. But the actual act of getting the iron hot is it's part of the process. And yeah, you're surprised as much as the people reading your stuff at the end of the day because it's
Yeah.
discoveries are fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, man. So what do you want to talk about today? I'm down for whatever you want.
Yeah, I figure, as always on the narrative, we can rabbit trail wherever we please. That includes you. I sort of roughly try to break the show down: first hour, second hour. First hour, the story right now. I try to keep it. Doesn't have to be stuff that's happening right now, but stuff that's in the news right now. And then the second hour, I want to get into kind of the theme. The theme that I named the show after was the Arctic Alliance, and of course, that's my spin on it. But you're the one who has talked about this the most. Like, I've read a lot of your work on it. We've talked about it. It's not something I'm super in-depth knowledgeable about, past or present. Although I've been, anytime now I see any news item hit about Arctic with US, Russia, and China, I log it away and I keep it in the memory bank because I know it's going to be relevant. So I want to talk about that in the second hour because I think it's encouraging and I'm interested in your takes on it. But the first hour here, the whole show U.S. Russia, right? We can talk about China if we want to, but you were just in Russia. If you were, I think the people would be interested in hearing about your experiences there, whatever you're willing to talk about. And I think that that's actually going to be interesting. Not even macro political backdrop for people before we talk about US, Russia, Ukraine, peace plans. Like, I want to hit some of that in this first hour, but I think it would be really interesting for people to kind of just hear your experiences literally just being in Russia this past week. What were you doing? What was it like? Expectations versus reality.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a surprise. I'd gotten a call because I had somebody in Russia who really liked the Arctic documentary that I had played on Badlands a few weeks back. 36 minutes. I made it about a year and a half ago on going through sort of the history of the Bering Strait idea, the fight to connect the USA and Russia with rail and development. It goes through the story of Alaska's sale to the United States, why Russia saved the United States during the Civil War, why Canada was locked into the British Empire to be used as a wedge. So I go through that whole story and I kind of like brush through how it was sabotaged. And so, yeah, that story appealed to some people who were running a film festival called We Won Together. Very, very happy title of a film festival. So it was like an international festival.
It was in Sochi, right? You were in Sochi.
It's in Sochi, yeah. It wasn't in Moscow. I was hoping to get to travel to Moscow because I've never been there. But my schedule was just really packed in. And yeah, they had basically films from Africa, from the Middle East, from China, from the US. Well, nobody from the USA, unfortunately, due to political circumstances, and most of Europe. I was the only Canadian.
We'll say you're US adjacent. How about
US
that?
Yeah. I would.
Because you're not like really Canadian. You're like, one of us, I think, more.
Well,
these days.
Yeah, I mean, my heart is Republican, and that comes across. So, they're really just trying hard to create an atmosphere of trust between cultures. So even though I gotta say, I'll admit that I didn't really like most of the films. I found that they lacked narrative.
That's
Most
why we're here. We could fix
here. That's
all
what it is. Exactly. So there was like a lack of structure, a lack of story in a lot of the short films that were presented. But I got the heart. The heart of it was the key. To understand other cultures, to feel what other people feel, and it was good intention. And it's the 20th year that this festival's been doing this every year. It's been endorsed by Putin.
Okay.
It's been endorsed by Lavrov.
You said it was called. Sorry, what was it called? The festival.
We Won Together, and it's the Eurasian People's Assembly.
And that is what it's called every time. It's called We Won Together. So they've been and the theme is the theme usually about these global nation state cooperation or historical cooperation. No,
it's more artsy. It's more artsy fartsy, typically speaking. So they kind of made an exception because they just really liked the idea that I was trying to convey, and I guess they felt that the time was right for it. Although it wasn't included, and this surprised me when I got there. This wasn't part of the main festival. As it turns out, they made a separate afternoon event just for my screening, and they brought in a bunch of speakers. From a whole bunch of NGOs, some from the university system. The former advisor to Jacques Chirac, the president of France, was she came and spoke as well at my event, and this was at the Petrus Lumumba University, which there's one in Moscow and there's one in Sochi. So that's where they, it was really cool to get to watch my film with a bunch of Russian delegates and diplomats and cultural people. And then just talking and having a good discussion. Now, there was some fights. There was some discomfort. Because I'd forgotten. Yeah, for me, I just take it for granted because I know so deeply how Wall Street and London bankers funded the Bolshevik Revolution. Like it's so.
you just take it as a given, like something you can just say openly, like the fucking British Empire, right? And then when you say terms like NGO. People in this audience get a little nervous when you're in rooms with them. So I think you got to be careful, right, of how much you're talking about the British Empire or whatever empires you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. So in this case, it was the thing that it was kind of a throwaway line in my documentary where I just say that Bolshevik Revolution funded by Western bankers overthrew the plans for the Bering Strait rail tunnel that Nicholas II was fighting for in 1905.
Yeah.
And Yeah, I got a few old school kind of crusty communist types, the old guard Soviet romanticists who got up and they took issue with that. But a lot of people, by and large, had no problem with what I'm saying. And even Putin has been on record saying that the Bolshevik Revolution was a giant, disastrous mess, and that freaked out a lot of Russians who still had very confused romantic ideas of the communist days, the glory days of Lenin, and so it helped me because I could just throw kind of a cheap line out there saying, "Well, your president seems to agree with me, so I don't know, like what? Why'd you take it up with him?"
That's a kind of an interesting. This is why I like the option to rabbit trail, because I think that's actually kind of an interesting little thing you stumbled on there for this audience in particular, right? Like most of us are Americans. Most of us came into this either directly through Trumpism and MAGA or, pulled into the political story or the alt political story by the gravity of the era of Trump, right? Like whatever people think of him, good, bad, or indifferent. Well, I should say there is no indifferent, right? Like the gravity of Trump has pulled a lot of people into these kind of stories. And by extension, for the West, into re-examining stories of Russia. But, I always try to leave aside and say, okay, whatever you think about Trump and MAGA and all of that, I think an issue or a human failing that a lot of Westerners have, and I'm sure a lot of Easterners have, is that even when you're talking about things like I talk about things like the Sovereign Alliance and this cooperation and these alliances, you're talking about these historical alliances between the US and Russia. People in this audience understand that we as the West have kind of been lied to about a lot of stuff. But I think sometimes this community, maybe including myself, can overcorrect, right? And it's like, okay, well, they were lying about this, so that means the Russians are super based and they always have been super based and everything. And I think what you just hit on there, it should be obvious, but we kind of forget, like, yeah, the Russians were brainwashed too. There's a reason, and he didn't make up the term, but he certainly applies it a lot. Chris Paul at Badlands often talks about the controlled opposition dynamic, right? And I'm interested in talking about that on the macro between the US and Russia. But I think what you're hitting on here is that the Russians, as their own macro, they've been dealing with a controlled opposition dynamic for a long time, and that started with the Bolshevik Revolution. I wonder your thoughts on that in terms of, it's interesting to hear you say romanticism about the Soviet era, but it's interesting because it makes sense to me that that would be a difficult thing for Putin to navigate, right? This era of Russians having national pride, and yet that national pride was in many ways subverted by this communist takeover.
Yeah, it's a serious balance, and I think there's been a concerted intention since Putin took power to really focus the identity of the Russian people on being the perpetual victors of the great war against fascism. And that's, I think, good. That's a solid starting point to base a solid identity around as a people, is that, okay, you beat fascism. Like they carried 95% of the burden of World War II. And we forget that in the West because the Russians just don't play a big role in our history books about that period in our movies. It's usually, like Band of Brothers and Saving Private Ryan. It's a very American focused narrative.
The Allies. Yeah,
the Allies. And it's like, yeah, we did a lot. But at the same time, compared to what the Russians did and suffered, they lost like 26 million people and took on 90% of the German Wehrmacht. And we only jumped into the war in an official way in like 1944 is when we got our hands dirty. So there wasn't really, we were doing Lend-Lease, we were using words, but we only opened up the second front in 44 after stalling.
It was like a fresh boxer going in the 10th round against the guy who had been fighting the previous 10 rounds, which it is what it is. We shouldn't, but yeah, it is almost unfathomable when you look at those stats of the Russians.
It really is. It's mind-boggling. And the Chinese, frankly, too. They took on, I think they lost about 12 million of their people against the Japanese fascists at the time, and they were carrying out horrendous things. It was like Mengele stuff with Unit 701 or 731, and Hiro Ichi, and that whole Mengele crowd of Japanese fascists, as well as the massacre at Nanjing and everything else. It's unimaginable to think what these people went through and how much they fought valiantly. And these are the people, the Russians and the Chinese, who have been demarcated in our minds to be seen as the enemy. And it's like, no, they're the ones who stopped fascism. So Putin has had to deal. I think that's a wise approach to start refocusing the identity on something constructive and useful. And he said one time in an interview that something I liked, which was something to the effect that if you don't miss the days of the Soviet Union, you have no heart, but if you want to bring them back, you have no brains.
That's so funny. I don't know if you've probably heard the American version of that, that which he must be referencing, unless the American version is referencing the Russian version. But the American version of that is, if you're not liberal when you're young, you have no heart. If you're not conservative when you're old, you have no brain.
Yeah.
That's so funny. Yeah, the Russian version of that. But that explains. I mean, several months ago, and I think it was General Steve Quast that I had on the show, but I had named it Trump Tightrope, and the whole theme of that episode was basically, again, whatever people think of him in any given deployment. I think it is fairly safe and reasonable to assert that the narrative battle space Donald Trump is navigating, just in the American mind, is extremely difficult. It's a tightrope, right? Because you've got nationalists, you've got liberals, you've got liberal centrists, you've got classical liberals, you've got basically Bolsheviks in the United States now. You've got America First, which is trying to carve itself out as something other than MAGA. So he's trying to navigate that battle space. And again, I think even people in the truth community here, or Badlanders, that look at Putin and have whatever thoughts they do of him, many people in our audience have positive opinions of Vladimir Putin, which I think is great progress. But I still think we sometimes look at him as this monolithic thing, like, oh, the Russians are all unified behind Vladimir Putin, and we're still working on that over here. But to what you're saying, that is not the case, right? It's like, well, is it a similar battle space to what Trump deals with, or does Putin enjoy more real support over there?
No, he does enjoy more real support, even though a lot of Russians find some of his views about Russian history deplorable. He's won their trust by just being consistently for Russia and being pretty consistently, Russia first. Yeah. And so just by being that consistent figure, I think, he's won over a lot of converts. And so the opinion polls are extremely high. I think he's got over 80% support by the Russian people, which compared to most American political polls is extraordinarily 51%. Good.
Yeah, usually.
If you're lucky, right?
Yeah.
So you have that, but you're right, because there are noble ideals within even Bolshevik communist sort of cause that you don't want to discourage, as far as, the selling point was, we want to elevate and empower the poor and the impoverished and the downtrodden and the oppressed. And we want to, what's the other message? We want to overthrow imperialism, which you should. People should want to reject and stop imperialism. And those are good things. Actually not that dissimilar from the general ideals of the American Revolution, as far as rejecting British imperialism, wanting to give people, a chance to break out of serfdom and have, human rights that give us opportunities to be the best part of ourselves that we couldn't be under the oppressive systems of hereditary, control. So it's all good. And the general admiration or desire to increase the productive powers of labor and industrialization, that's all good too. But then you got these toxic Trojan horses that you want to shake people out of. And definitely when you look at there's more than a few bad Trojan horses within the communist ideology.
Right.
Not all communists, it's kind of like, I guess, the Bible or the Quran or a lot of like religious textbooks, like reasonable Muslims and reasonable Christians and reasonable Jews will often take the more distasteful things located within their religious books and simply not act upon them. Like, do we say that women shouldn't open their mouths in church? Well, according to, if I was doing a literal reading of Corinthians, yeah, I'd have to enforce that women should keep their mouths shut in church. But I'm a human being first. I'm reasonable. I'm able to say, okay, maybe at that time there might have been an argument to be made for that context.
They might have been really annoying at that time.
They might have just been really naggy back then. Yeah, it took them a while to get
off.
And
they're getting a little uppity these days. I'm not going to speak for Matt, but I'm just saying I think we could agree. Let's keep it in our back pocket. I think you're taking the mature view here, but let's just not throw that one out because we weren't there, and we always want to keep our options open.
I'm not God,
Yeah, exactly.
But I'm just saying, so people will not tend to act on every single element within their religious text, and it's the same thing for the communism. People say, oh, it's just it's an atheistic system. It's like, yeah, well, it kind of works like a religion, a substitute religion, because it's based upon articles of faith that somehow there is this eschatology, this teleological sort of pull of some glorious utopian moment in the future that requires us to suffer these perpetual class struggle periods of periodic revolution, right? Where naturally the natural order is for scarcity to run amok because those who control the levers of productivity will necessarily, by their own nature, only exploit the workers. And as they exploit, they increase pressure, and like any pressure cooker, it must necessarily blow up on you. Yeah. And then the proletariat take over, and then that'll have to happen for a number of cycles. And at some point, we have faith, and it is a matter of faith, that we will have some utopian perfect society that has an end of history to it. And everybody's going to be mathematically equal forever with no belief in private property or religion or those things that separate us and alienate us. That'll all be gone, and we'll all just be perfectly bald-shaven, I don't know, Star Trek-y type of, but more boring Star Trek-y people wearing robes with the same, I don't know, shades of pastel colors in a Logan's Run situation.
It's interesting because I've got some Matryoshka dolls. Oh, I hate being backwards on the screen. Matryoshka dolls here were given to me by a Badlander who came to GART. I had been talking about that I like Matryoshka dolls, so they gave me some that were from Russia, actually. His wife is Russian. But the reason I like Matryoshka dolls is I often use them in analogies because I think they make for great thought experiments and thought paths. And it's how I organize my mind, or, that's a overstatement. I don't know if I can organize it, but I try to in that way. But a lot of what you're talking about is making me think of this. So I mentioned controlled opposition dynamic earlier. You just mentioned Trojan horses, and you're using that, in a like a philosophical, socio-political, cultural context, right? We all understand Trojan horse on an actual level, deception and warfare, that sort of thing. But I think it's the reason I almost think it's like Trojan Matryoshka dolls. For anybody unaware of what Matryoshka is, it's Russian nesting dolls is another word for it. The doll within a doll within a doll, those kinds of things, right? So if you apply this to these cycles that you're talking about, it gets really interesting and also really dark, because I agree with you that there's these Trojan horse movements throughout centuries in these different countries, including our own. But I think what makes them so difficult to untangle is that it's more like a Matryoshka situation. So let me try to think of an example. Like, you just basically mentioned if you wanted to steel man the spirit behind collectivism or communism, you might use the word humanist. And again, I'm not defending collectivism. I'm not a collectivist. I'm just saying there's like this humanist element to the central argument of collectivism. And like that's the first doll. Like the first idea is everybody should be equal and happy. It's like, okay, well, that's a nice little idea you got there. And then there's another idea around that. It's like, well, and to do that, we need to take away private property. And it's like, well, I don't like that. It's like, well, hold on. We're also going to give you a military that defends you. And it's like, okay, well, I think that's good. And then there's another doll on top of that that's like, and we're going to brand it all as ultra-nationalist. And it's like, okay, well, I am nationalist, and that makes me feel like I'm a sovereign, which is kind of a contradiction in terms, perhaps. But, this isn't the greatest analogy. I just think it makes these things, it's why untangling the programming is so hard. And an American example, you mentioned the Bolsheviks. I'd maybe like you to go into more detail about maybe applying this in your own words to that. But to set it up, I would say something I've talked about a lot, being a former liberal, former Democrat in the US, I look back at the 90s and 2000s era of American conservatism as this matryoshka nesting dolls idea. So for example, you had the 9/11 attacks, right? And right, left, and center all agree, in hindsight, there was an outpouring of patriotism, like a real feeling of patriotism that came on the wake of those attacks. And we don't need to get into all the reasons why. But that's like the first doll, right? Like that's good. Americans were unified. And then you had the Republican Party come in and be like the American flag party. And it's like, oh, this is making us feel good. This is the party that's really making us feel patriotic. And then they kind of like rebranded it into the military industrial complex. And you're like, okay, I guess that's patriotic now. And I've talked about that. The reason that they layer, I think, the psyops in this manner is that American conservatives, who really were these earnest patriotic people, they kind of got suckered into this collectivist, like imperialist, fascist sort of mindset. And then alternatively, it made liberals like me almost go toward collectivism because you're reacting to how extreme the patriotic right is becoming. And I just wonder if something similar, when you mentioned the romanticism about the Soviet era, it might be inverted of what I just mentioned. But I wonder if there is something similar there, where it was like, okay, you had this Russian nationalism, but you had this huge disparity in wealth, gave rise to the collectivist movement, but then Russians still had this national pride mixed with this collectivism.
Yeah, that's a great framing. But how opposites will tend to, like when you push something to one extreme as a system, you will create a tension that will result in a very predictable backlash to the opposite extreme. Right. And it is known throughout human history that the more you can push these extremes, the more you ironically will get a convergence of principle as well, where the extremes begin to meet, as we found with the Uniparty. And Hillary Clinton, who people thought in the 90s was representing like more socialistic leaning, anti-war narrative, all of a sudden showing her, I guess, the colors that were there the whole time, sounding just like a neocon. And the Cheneyites all became supporters of Hillary as well. So you've got these things left and right. And in Russia, it's no exception to that rule. And I think you're correct. Like if you look at Russia, the problem there was that the pressure cooker phenomenon, though you had the noble efforts from time to time by people like Peter the Great, who was a major reformer. He took on a lot of the nested old nobility that had looted the population in feudalism. But he didn't end feudalism. He couldn't do it, or serfdom. But he did bring in industrial, he tried to learn from the best of the West. He brought in some of the best Italian engineers and architects and musicians and people from France, the scientists. Leibniz was brought in as his privy counselor to help really train the Russians to become engineers, to think like scientists, and they did a lot of good. He did a lot of good. But the problem, I think, was also that these old families, a lot of them go back to I think last time I was on the show with you, we took some jabs at the Northmen. But
Right.
if you look at Rurik and a lot of the dynastic upper level families that are still, they never fully disappeared from Russia. Um, they they wanted to restore. They hated that Alexander II, that's the Tsar who came in after the Crimean War that ended in 1856.
Right.
It was a terrible war that really messed up the Russians a lot. It was a trap set by the British and the French. And only America stood with Russia at the time. But America had its own problems. We were about to go into our own. See, I'm saying our own
But isn't
civil
that
war.
amazing as a sub note?
Yeah.
Like how quickly that wasn't that long ago that we're like, yeah, U.S. and Russia versus Britain. It's like
Yeah.
how quickly this has all been inverted. But
I
yeah, go
know,
ahead.
it kills me. It kills me. But it's
Yeah.
it's true in the grand scheme of things. This
Yeah.
is like a blink of
That's
an eye in the
quick.
past.
Yeah.
And yeah, so Tsar Alexander II, right as he was gearing up to save the United States during the U.S. Civil War, he had launched into the liberation of the serfs. He legalized serfdom. That put 25 million serfs. All of a sudden, gave them liberty. These are basically slaves. They're people with no human rights, living as the possessions of the feudal lords of Russia. And a lot of these lords, they they did a lot to sabotage, just in the same way that the slaveocracy in America
Yeah.
didn't really get dealt with, even though the Civil War ended.
Right.
They were largely granted their possessions back as soon as Lincoln was dead. And you had sharecropping. Basically, the slaves were told, okay, you might be a slave, you may be a free person all of a sudden, you may be allowed to vote, you're no longer 3/5 of a person legally, but the economic structures that were imposed onto those newly liberated people were essentially the exact same thing as slavery, except now you're going to
Yeah.
get paid 5 cents a day, but you're taxed 6 cents a day by
Right.
whoever is owning the land that you're now tilling. And it's the same land, and now you're just treated more shittily
Yeah,
because you
you're
have to
living
pay.
on the land. You can't leave the land. You've got to work all day and night. Your
Yeah,
family is bound to it. Yeah, so exactly.
exactly.
It's like I don't know. It's like contractual slavery or
Kind of,
something.
yeah. It's a weird Orwellian thing,
Yeah.
right? And so the
But to your
same thing
point,
kind of happened.
serfdom basically.
Yeah, and that's the same thing in Russia too. So it was really difficult to the big challenge was 25 million new citizens just appearing on the scene was a really big burden in a nation. How do you absorb them? How do you give them skills? How do you employ them? That took a lot of work, and it was again being sabotaged left and right. Now, the thing here is that a lot of these families, these old families, they created something called the secret police of Russia called the Okhrana, and that was around in 1880, around the same period that Tsar Alexander II gets assassinated by an anarchist cell. They're all over the world, these anarchist friggin' cells that will
Yeah.
deploy terrorists and assassins. And one of them is deployed by, or is run by a cell that's shaped by a figure. I don't know if you know Prince Peter Kropotkin.
No,
Okay, he's like a
I don't think
big.
so.
Even today, his writings are even taught in like Stanford and a lot of Western universities. He's a hero to a lot of libertarians, which have a lot in common with the anarchists, as far as believing in sort of self-organized systems devoid of any law, and just
Yeah.
like So Kropotkin's writings are still. I've had a lot of libertarians write to me saying how much they love him, but it's like this guy was a descendant of Rurik. He took great pride in being of the bloodline of Rurik, and believed he was the rightful heir to the throne of he should have replaced the Romanovs, he believed. But he was also touring the United States. He was associated with Emma Goldman and her terrorist cell that generated that Polish anarchist that killed McKinley in 1901.
Yeah.
He
Which
was
is
affiliated.
all more timely than perhaps since World War One right now, right? Where we've literally got it's all the same shit. It's amazing just hearing you. Sorry to jump in, but when you just dropping these historical nuggets, and it's like, look at right now. You're talking about these old families. In the 20th century, we started calling them oligarchs, It's actually incredible. Something that we might dive into a little bit is I've done a lot of modern research on Russia in terms of the 90s through today, especially around the Vladimir Putin era, because I think my baseline view is that I think that Putin's rise marked a shift, a step change that recalls the czars that you're talking about at the end of the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century. Might be wrong about that, but that's just what I think is he's recalling. But you mentioned Peter the Great, and Putin references him from time to time. He referenced him a few times in his infamous Tucker interview. But yeah, you look at the battle space right now, and it's like you're talking about these oligarchs and these families and how they were funding anarchists, but they're just useful idiots, right? They're pushing them in certain directions.
Yeah.
And look at what we've got right now in the U.S. that Trump, one of the major things that 2025 Trump admin has been targeting on a narrative and an actual level is the NGO funding of whether it's Black Lives Matter, Antifa. I mean, we're hearing Muslim Brotherhood today. And by the way, guys, if you think it's a coincidence that he's targeting the Muslim Brotherhood the same few days that he's talking about Minnesota politics, like these are hand in hand. I think he's trying to not so subtly get us to draw some lines between some sitting congressmen and women and maybe their true loyalties. But to your point about these cells, it's the same thing. It's another example of these controlled opposition dynamics. And usually when you trace the money back, yeah, in the US right now, it might be running through an NGO, but there's a reason that when you trace the money from the NGO, you end up at like a couple of names, right? George Soros is infamous in this audience. Doesn't mean he's responsible for all of it, but it's like these NGOs are collectives, but the seeding money usually goes all the way back to just a select couple of families that are behind each one of them. So same thing was going on apparently back then, even in Russia.
Yeah. Well, and there's a number of these things. Like back then you had the International Red Cross was, and this is according to the work of Anthony P. Sutton, was complicit in being, or at least being used as a sort of proto NGO. They didn't have the same names back in those days, but that was used to help prop up these various revolutionary cells throughout Russia. And yeah, like you said, when you start scratching back on the surface appearance, a lot of these organizations, you tend to start seeing a very different set of power structures than the ones you believed were there behind what appeared to be on the surface people's movements. And it's not to say that all people's movements that were revolutionary are all controlled oppositions. It doesn't mean that, but it just means that more of them are than we would expect to see. And the Bolshevik Revolution, I think that's the thing, is that so part of what they were doing, it was kind of like the way the Jesuits and the Rosicrucians back in the 30 Years War that saw Christians killing Christians, Catholics killing Protestants and vice versa for a long time. The way that they worked together, it was one ritual, and you could prove there's a scholar named Frances Yates who's written on the Rosicrucian Enlightenment, and she's done a lot of work on the chemical wedding. But she herself is an initiate. She's like a druidic priestess from the Warburg Institute. But she's like sort of one of these authorities on the narrative reconstruction of like what caused the Renaissance, what caused these major events in history. And so she's assigned to spin everything around the idea history. And so she's spinning the idea that everything good came from black magicians working behind the scenes. It doesn't mean that there's high value in what she's saying, because a lot of the facts, despite her meta narrative being dishonest, there's a lot of facts that are true. And she does point out clearly, and I think the case is provable, that the Jesuit order and the Rosicrucian order, though they worked to create opposing dynamics, one was operating through the Habsburg Catholic Empire, that's the Jesuits. The other one was operating through the Protestant League. And so they created, like you were describing earlier, this tension based upon the sort of Catholic, rigid tyrannical imposition of law from above,
right,
to get everybody to conform to the right behavior, to
right.
regulate,
Well, because
mandate.
the Irish are, and as an Irishman, are,
Yeah.
as Freud said, we're the only people impervious to psychoanalysis. But to your point about the Catholic imposition, that's literally why. It's because the British Empire learned that you can't govern Irish people at that time. So, but you could through the church.
Right.
So it's you know,
Well,
it's
I'm from
perfect,
Quebec. Quebec and Ireland, same deal, right? It's purely that was the same. That's our history too. And it's so, but all that to say, back in those days, so the Jesuits were created kind of like a synthetic construct in the 1540 or so, and they became the brains managing the power of the Inquisition, of the of the schools, and they were very, very good at it. But then it was so suffocating for people who actually wanted to abide by their conscience, and found themselves often in the Protestant faith, that they wanted to rebel. But the rebellion was then captured by that very same Rosicrucian operation of occultists that were on the esoteric level working together with the Jesuits.
Yeah,
they were both
and they made the Protestants essentially the I'm just this is like my programming, but I'm wondering, they kind of made them the extreme overreaction, like the meta narrative, as you called it, became that the Protestants were like these violent anarchists, I guess, anti-systemites, violent, anti-government, anti-regime, but essentially anti-life. Like that's a lot of the kind of programming, at least out of Ireland, the Troubles and all that, which is all downstream from what you're talking about. But yeah, I mean that's
interesting, right? Because the Anglican groupings that run things like the Freemasonic Orangemen, the Orange Order in the north of Ireland, that also we had all over in Toronto and Ontario, like suffocating and squelching.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah. Like during the early 1900s, something like 1 out of every 3 adult males in Ontario were Orangemen.
Wow.
From the Orange, and that was like followers of William of Orange that created their own secret society in the 1790s, I guess, or maybe earlier. No,
the Prussians, for anybody who's not aware of the Orangemen.
Yeah, kind of root. Yeah, so the Dutch. So I mean, this thing is like pretty ubiquitous how it spread itself out there. But all that to say that's the nature of the game was, you created the Rosicrucian fervor, right? Where you have these Hermeticists, alchemists, Kabbalists that are being organized around these Neoplatonic networks that all of a sudden reveal that there is this promised. Anyway, they basically organized to brainwash this Elector Palatine of Bohemia, Frederick V, who believed that he's like going to liberate humanity from the evils of the Jesuit Empire, the Habsburgs, and he basically goes and walks into a trap, and the trap is set, and basically you got a bunch of Bohemian initiates who all organize a crowd to call for him to save them by having him declare himself the new emperor, and he's the head of the Protestant League. And so as soon as he does that, well, all of a sudden now you got a war with the Habsburgs, and he launches into this war. Huh?
The God Emperor, man. A lot of analogs to right now going on.
And everyone's wiped out. Like the Battle of Snowy Mountain, it's like 1620, and he's wiped out. Huge massacre, and then it just sets into motion this like revengist eye for an eye thing. And then you got like the way it seems to work is that during the 30 Years' War, you've got these provocateurs who, like the Protestants and the Catholics, they generally want to live and work together and love each other as human beings who love Jesus. That's generally their orientation. But then you've got these provocateurs being sent in with like night raids, burning Catholic villages and killing a bunch of people, and then saying, the Protestants were here. Now, they weren't really Protestants. They were a bunch of like marauding mercenaries who were told to do this. And then inversely, a bunch of Protestants would be killed during a night raid, and all of a sudden they'd hear the words like, "Oh yeah, Catholics live forever, down with the Protestants." But again, it was like provocateurs just inflaming things. And we see the same thing in the Gaza over the years between Jews and Muslims being organized by British intelligence Same thing in Russia. So in Russia, you had, on the one hand, the Okhrana networks enforcing this clampdown on these anarchist networks that are popping up everywhere. A lot of them are Jewish. A lot of them, because the thing with the Jews is that they are heavily persecuted in Russia. You have a whole history of Jewish pogroms that is creating a really like suffocating environment for a lot of the Jews to live. And there's periodic like massacres of Jewish villages that happen from time to time. It's an organizing principle of the stupid Russian psyche for many, many centuries. It happens all over Europe too. And so you've got this kind of impoverished pressure cooker of abuse that then creates a recruitment filtration into the very anarchist cells that are being organized and sponsored by those very same agencies that are creating the suffocation. So it's the same very same simple formula in that sense. And then you have, of course, a bunch of soft-minded people who should know better within the elites who are like Nicholas II's, I think, a sympathetic guy. He's the guy who's the whole family got wiped out. Yeah, he loved the Bering Strait. He loved that idea, but he married a woman who was the granddaughter of Queen Victoria. He was a terrible judge of character. And so he invited as his personal advisors some of the most deep-seated, dishonest agents of evil to be his like confessor, to be his personal advisors, and they're giving him things like the Protocols of Zion as like that your troubles are all being originated by these pesky Jewish conspirators, and you have to obviously clamp down even harder. And he ends up falling for the trap, and he restores the pogroms, doubles down on them. He's like, oh, they killed my dad. Alexander III got killed. He was probably poisoned by arsenic. And he's like led to believe, okay, that's why I have to oppress these Jews even more. And then that feeds into the thing that becomes the 1905 revolution. But who's funding it? It's Jacob fucking Schiff, the guy who's like funding the American banker, who's funding what's going to become the Federal Reserve, and who's funding the Japanese to go and attack the Russians in 1904, which destroys 90% or 70% of the Russian Navy. That guy is also funding the Mensheviks and Trotsky and this whole network and they've got a lot to work with because they're recruiting shit tons of people. Jabotinsky is a part of that. He's Ukrainian. He's also working with Trotsky in 1905, recruiting young recruits to both overthrow the Tsar, but at the same time go down and set up this like fascist modeled Jewish army that later on becomes the Haggadah.
Now, on the narrative, Matt, there's no such thing as Ukrainians. We don't.
Right.
We say that that's not necessarily a real country. No, I'm just fucking around, but it's partly true.
Yeah. Okay. Now I can't say.
Yeah. No, it's interesting though, because when you're talking about the essentially the controlled opposition dynamic here, I think this year and right now in the MAGA movement, I don't want to go to a whole thing about MAGA, but just as an aside here, we're seeing a lot of quote unquote intra-MAGA strife, right? Intra-nationalist tension in the U.S. And I think an oversight that a lot of MAGA makes is that many, even in our audience, a lot of Badlanders are pretty familiar with the Bolsheviks. They're familiar at least with the American version of that, which they can see the controlled opposition dynamic there. They can see that it's NGOs that are funding these quote unquote leftist movements in the US that, especially since 2020, have been very violent and outwardly extremist, right? They're burning down Minneapolis, and the quote unquote left in the US lately has been considered extreme, which is true. But this dynamic you're talking about, I think the concern that somebody like I raise, Chris Paul talks about this pretty often, is a lot of the audience, a lot of the MAGA audience, rather, Trump's audience, I mean, they can understand how the lefties have been kind of psyoped into this extremist vision of fight back against the Orange Man, fight back against the Tsar, fight back against the Emperor. It's funny when you use that that term because that's what the left calls him. You know, they refer to him essentially as an emperor and a dictator and all the rest of it, just like they do with every Sovereign Alliance member, including Putin. They understand all that, but then they'll get mad when somebody like me points out, like, hey, you know, take a look at Nick Fuentes' rhetoric. And I don't mean the rhetoric that he's saying on Tucker Carlson's show. I mean, like, go to his Gab posts. I was on Gab after this 2020 election steal. I kind of got pulled, and in my personal view, I'm not saying it's the founders of Gab or anybody's intention, but the reason I left Gab after about a year is I started having this weird feeling that I was kind of being groomed in a very fake right-wing manner. So as a collective, not directly, but basically going like, yeah, we're all here because they stole the election. They banned us all off Twitter, like all the MAGA people, all the disillusioned independents, whatever. We all end up on Gab. And then it's like Nick Fuentes was a big voice there. He wasn't the only one. And you'd get really base rhetoric. You'd get like 99% like nationalist, sovereign-minded, constitutionalist, blah, blah, blah. You'd get some like the Jews stuff. And, you know, you go down those rabbit holes. You're like, yeah, I get what you're talking about. I mean, they did seem to be a little suspect. They were involved in a lot of things, right? But then you get like the once a week posts that would be like, you know, Trump's not enough. And that's kind of the rhetoric where it's like, well, when you say that, what do you mean? Yeah. What do you mean he's not enough? And I think we are seeing an activation of that cell right now in the zeitgeist. Mileage varies, but it, you know, I guess the reason I bring that up is to say MAGA is good and has been trained to recognize controlled opposition dynamic on the left and the construction of extremist behavior on the left. And while we don't currently have widespread extremist behavior on the right in terms of action, there is absolutely the seeding taking place to try to create it as a reaction to the extremism on the left. And that's the other side of the controlled opposition dynamic, or the dialectic. And again, Chris Paul's been talking about this for years, that when we talk about people like Fuentes, we are saying like, hey guys, you haven't fallen over the cliff yet, but there is a cliff over there. Yeah. And these guys might be trying to get you over here because these guys are on the same side as those guys over there who are burning down Minneapolis, right? And this was happening, to your point about when you bring up the czars, it's like, yeah, we got to be ultra-nationalist. And then you kind of look into who was pulling the strings of the ultra-nationalists. The ultra-leftists and the collectivists were ultimately behind them, right?
Yes. And you could look at this in so many places. I mean, everybody knows of the origins of fascism, including Mussolini fascism, the corporate fascism, and the Nazi version. We're all National Socialists first. But before that even in America, if you look at Francis and Edward Bellamy, the followers of Madame Blavatsky, 1880s, 1890s, these were the guys who brought in like the Pledge of Allegiance into schools. The salute that was then adopted later on in Germany was modeled on the Bellamy salute that was formulated in a very specific way around the fascia concept of organizing society around a certain type of patriotism that is not the kind of healthy patriotism that I think we love, but it's something a little bit more Roman Empire-esque. Yeah. That's rooted in a sort of exceptionalism, an elitism, this idea that we, because of our affiliation, our intrinsically, our affiliation to our tribe, are superior than the other social groups who are thus inferior. They're Untermenschen to our Ubermenschenism, and thus the type of rights that they claim access to must thus be less than those rights that we have as real Romans, you know? And so you've got that type of language also being spun by Nick Fuentes a lot. Like, where are the Roman citizens? Where are the Romans who are standing up for our white national rights? You know, like it's nudging people and like encouraging people to listen to AI translations of Hitler. saying that, Hitler's actually much more of a patriotic MAGA guy than you would realize. And Joe Rogan got in on it.
Oh,
and
he
started
played
promoting...
one on TV. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that's the key, I think, there, right? Is that, when you use, Hitler and Nazis are such catch-all emotional terms that I think to the quote-unquote left in the modern day, they call people like us that, right? They call us fascists and Nazis and Hitler and whatever. So it's been robbed of a lot of its meaning on the quote-unquote left. But to your point, the other side of that dialectic is that because the left has over-assigned this term and this ideology to what is just nationalism, some people that are just regular nationalists, which is to say sovereigns, really, like people use that word nationalism all the time. And it's kind of funny because to your point about tribalism, it's like if you really kind of start digging deep into nationalist rhetoric, and I mean literal nationalist rhetoric, not like nationalist sentiment, you start bumping up against a different form of collectivism, like maybe a smaller, tighter-knit form of collectivism. But it's kind of, to your point about the superiority thing, it's like that's kind of what you're saying when you're going all the way into Fuentes is a Christian nationalist. And it's like, if you ask somebody to define what that is, they don't really want to. And then sometimes we'll talk about Christian nationalism on these shows, and there'll be a small percentage of the audience. It's like, Christian nationalism is a good thing. And they're coming at it from an earnest framework of saying, like, I'm a Christian and I'm a nationalist. And it's like, that's not a Christian nationalist. That's not what these guys are saying. Like, these guys are more saying what you're hinting at, which is like, well, let's start by kicking everybody out, which we would probably agree with, like law and order and all that. But there is a controlled opposition dynamic in that wants to rebrand and redefine Christianity and nationalism as being somehow the same thing. And we got to tie those things together. Therefore, we can combine religious zealotry with nationalist zealotry into this really difficult to break ideological framework, mixed with all this rhetoric of othering everybody, right? And it's kind of funny because it's like there are Bolsheviks or modern leftists and collectivists that see this on the right accurately, but they fall into the controlled opposition dynamic of becoming socialists to combat it. And again, it's turtles all the way down, where you go all the way up, and it's like you're going to see that there's probably collectivists or fascists pulling the strings of both groups, funding both groups, amplifying figures in both groups, because that's what they want. They want, when people think about the left, they want you to think about Zoran Mamdani, and when you think about the right, they want you to think about Nick Fuentes.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and there's so much that we have in common too, because we're all getting screwed by the exact same oligarch. So at the end of the day, it's oligarchical collectivism, as far as I could see, is the enemy. Is that these inbred oligarchs, and I say inbred because they don't really tend to at the top marry that out of their bloodlines. They do have a sort of arrangement to work together to share their resources, in a sense, to enslave everybody else. And to a certain degree, in times of plenty for them, they will tend to backstab, and it becomes a bit of like a den of sharks, with a bit of blood in the water. But overall, it's an incredible continuity of power that these higher families have that go back centuries, millennia, in many cases, and they transcend the individual ruptures and revolutions that tend to overthrow different orders at different times. These families, some will tend to maybe disappear for a period, or and some new ones will tend to be brought into the upper clubs, but not very much. It's pretty closed and rigid. So you do have this thing, and what you were saying kind of reminded me a little bit too of the reason why the Nazis were so successful wasn't that they were a naturally, organically emerging movement in Germany at all, right? You had to have intervention by the game masters that artificially messed up Germany by inducing World War I, which was a trap anyway, that again, never should have happened. Once again, anarchist terrorists ployed as little ideological utopian socialist things that
Funded
were
by
used,
elites.
funded
Yep.
by elites. Yeah, and then a useful, disposable idiot is then jacked up on whatever kind of like hype that he's being given. His propaganda is put to the max, and he's like juiced up to go and take a gun and shoot somebody, a high value target like an archduke in this case in Serbia, or visiting from, but it was a Serbian Black Hand killing the Austrian archduke, and then that activates a bunch of secret mutual security agreements that had arranged over the years by British and French intelligence with the Russians.
Yeah.
That all of a sudden
Article
gets a
5
bunch
style.
of big powers. Yeah. Anyway,
Yep.
so you got that thing going on. Then you got Germany getting hammered by the Versailles Treaty. Again, totally unjust, very predictably unpayable debts they were told to pay. Of course, that was going to ruin an already ruined people. And then you knew that out of that type of psychological torture, torment, and subjugation, they would want dignity to breathe again, which is where something unmarketable and unpalatable, like the Nazi messaging of eugenics, mass sterilization of the unfit, expansionism militarily into other nations, all that was unpalatable. The Germans were very cultured people. They did not like that sort of thing. And the Nazis were a fringe movement in the early 20s. But you suffocate and somebody enough, they will jump up for oxygen. And that's where all of a sudden, at a certain point, they did that. And the Nazis were there to absorb that energy. But at the same time, you had the real threat of Bolshevism. So what Trotsky was representing was not just something in Russia, but you had German Bolshevik movements, Hungarian. The Bolsheviks became the government of Hungary in 1919. And, you had George Lukács, who's the Bolshevik minister of culture, bringing in sex ed into a very like conservative Christian society, bringing that into the schools across the board. It didn't go over well, but all to say, like, it was everywhere, funded by the exact same bankers who were funding fascism. So they created these things. Now, what was Trotsky? If you look at him, well, he was promoting eugenics in Russia. He was in charge of, as soon as he got power Lenin didn't like him. I'm actually, having now read some of the writings of Lenin, I got to say I'm more sympathetic to Lenin, although I disagree with his ideology. As a human being, he really despised Trotsky. For me, the most deplorable character at that stage of the drama in history was Trotsky. He's the guy who was in Wall Street, like hobnobbing with the bankers, getting funding to take back to Russia to fund the revolution. So he was like the point man. And so he was the guy brought in, and he became Minister of Industry and Science. And he's the one who was the guy who invited Armand Hammer and the Western financiers to come in and basically buy up everything that the Russian Empire had formerly had under its so-called national control. It was all sold off. The exact same model that was done 80 years later in the 90s when the Soviet Union was unplugged and Operation Hammer was invoked again. Operation Hammer being a name that George Bush gave the same thing, the privatization of Russia under Perestroika, based on Armand Hammer of the 1920s, who was Lenin's banker. So that it was the same thing, the new economic policy.
It's the same template. I mean, if you took out the specific names and time periods out of what you just said and just said the connector, the what's and the hows, you could be describing the last 30 years in the United States, right? You're talking about 40 years, maybe even. Sex education in schools, leftism drifting further and further away from traditional Americana ideals, traditional Western ideals. And then I would say in the last decade, accelerating like fucking crazy from the perspective of most people in North America into insanity. And, for as much as we can talk about sometimes that the appearance or the characterization of the left as Bolsheviks and like Marxists is overblown sometimes, it is real. I mean, but it's not all just NGOs and Antifa and everything. I mean, you go to a local school or anything like that these days, and you're going to see that, no, it's baked into the cake. Like, there is now open Marxism. The university system is probably most notorious, but that's like the trickle-down effect, right? It starts in the universities. then the educators are being educated or indoctrinated. The educators get into the high schools and elementary schools, and then they're the ones teaching the kids. But yeah, I mean, it's incredible when you lay out like the templates like that. It's the exact same type of template. And again, if you look at the United States as an example, you've got Trotskyism, essentially, which is the leftism. And then they know that an organic right movement is going to spring up against that. So what do they then do? They try to define what that right movement is, and they try to kind of funnel it into an extremist position. The irony, I think, is that they have tried to saddle Donald Trump with that Hitler kind of he is the extreme end of the nationalist reaction to the leftist drift, when I think most people in this audience would say Trump is the one stopping that, which I think that case is being emboldened by the fact that a whole right-wing quote-unquote movement is springing up against Trump by saying he isn't right-wing enough. Looks like he's not actually the guy that's the controlled opposition.
Yeah.
He's the guy trying to pull people away from the controlled opposition.
Well, that's where my concern from the beginning, this is why I never trusted Elon Musk at the end of the day, because as soon as he opened the door to idea of a new political party, which hasn't happened yet, but just following the kind of messaging that he had been putting out, and has had his grok as well put out early on, sort of rehabilitating Hitler. There's a story of like Grok went renegade and started like, huh? Yeah,
I remember that. That was funny.
Promoting Hitler and stuff, and just the line he's been promoting Tommy Robinson as well in England, who's really a heavy Mossad operative, ironically, on the one hand, but who's pushing this really sick Crusader Templar revisionism of what English nationalism should be around sort of a new Crusader ethos around the Unite the Kingdom idea against immigrants. It all kind of,
which is being prompted by real issues. To your earlier point, they have flooded England and Ireland with these immigrants. They are violent. They do not assimilate. But then, who is leading the counter narrative against the insurgency?
Well, that's the thing, and you just see how when we get out of the bottom up analysis, but look at it top down, it becomes so clear how this formula is operating. Because on the one hand, the countries that these immigrants are coming from have been annihilated by imperial operations from above, both economic terrorism that's destroyed and crippled various African nations, South American nations' ability to have industrial progress. So we've sabotaged their economies, keeping them impoverished so that their labor would be cheaper, or they'd be easier to basically steal from if we want their resources or whatever, as has been demonstrated by John Perkins, the Confessions of the Economic Hitman story, all of that. That's been going on for decades. Or we just bomb them to smithereens, destroying their infrastructure like we did in Iraq. We destroyed their economy like we did in Syria. We destroyed everything by bombs, and then supporting through the CIA's operations, radicalizing madrasas, promote Wahhabism, that promote this like very primitive, vicious perversion of Islam. So we do all of these things, create all of these hostile emotions and sentiments in the people who we destroyed, and then on the other hand, open up the door to mass immigration, because now they can't live in those countries. They want to live in somewhere. So we're all of a sudden giving them like posh. I just came back from Russia, right? And on the plane from Istanbul to Canada, the whole plane was like 80% asylum seekers from Iraq. People who had never been on a plane. They just had they have horror stories, scars. You could just see the kids who've clearly seen people blow up in front of their faces. They're on a plane for the first time. It was a packed plane, nice plane too. It's Turkish Airways. They treat you really well. They have a chef with a chef's hat and a full kitchen on the plane. It's a nice plane. But the thing was like full of seekers, and these planes come in on a regular basis, just loading people off. So of course they don't know how. A lot of them have a lot of
controlled opposition dynamic. Forces, it's like smoking a fox out of a foxhole. Like they smoke the these foreigners out and then flood them into your lands. And it's like, yeah, if you can be ruthless in your own mind, I mean, ruthlessly logical, not ruthlessly emotional. You can be ruthlessly logical. Of course, they're going to come here. Like, and many of them are going to feel justified in taking whatever they want from the system because they are aware on the macro that the conditions in their nation, to your point, were not organic. It doesn't mean that all these 14-year-old Syrians are like aware of the geopolitical battle space in depth, but they are generally or broadly aware that the conditions in their nation was essentially cultivated or fomented by the empire. So then when they go to the empire, they don't give a fuck about your nationalism. They're like, yeah, my dad got blown up by your nationalism. So, again, the best example, I always say, like, the best end state for the controlled opposition dynamic from the perspective of the controllers from on high is when it turns real. Like, it starts, quote unquote, fake. It starts as engineered. But if they do their job well as controllers, the controlled opposition dynamic becomes a real thing. And then they've got these nations, I think you especially are seeing it in Europe right now, Germany, for example, Eastern Europe, where it's like, now you've got real hatred and animosity building between both sides of the controlled opposition dynamic, both of which we would see as justified on a micro. I think on a macro, the nationalists are the ones who are more morally justified, right? Their nations are being invaded by these people. But you're like, why aren't they staying in their nations? Like, oh, well, your nation's a shithole. Well, who made it a shithole, right? And to your point about even Islam, and I know Ghost, your co-host Ghost talks about this a lot. Is Islam what many Christians have been taught it is? Was it? Or did it become this new thing? I'm no religious scholar, but they weren't always blowing people up in churches and mosques. Like, that's something that kind of started with the advent of Western intelligence.
Yeah, that's an important part of the formula. Again, yeah, like if it weren't for the CIA pouring $500 million of US taxpayer money from the 70s onward into radicalizing madrasas that specifically taught Wahhabi theoryism, if that hadn't happened, there wouldn't be an Al Qaeda. It wouldn't be there. It was like it was as popular as the Nazis were in the early 20s. It was like a fringe thing. Most Muslims didn't think that way at all. And if you look at history, there's so many instances of just level-headed human beings in the Muslim world living in harmony with their Jewish and their Christian brethren. The biggest Jewish community outside of Israel is in Iran. Like, they got a ton of mosques. It's like there's a lot of Jews. They're not afraid of their government. They're not being persecuted by Sharia law. They're not being told to like go and cover head to toe. Even the Muslim people living in Iran, you look at like a lot of these videos you see on YouTube of people just walking around with their cell phone of the, taking, video footage of the Iranian subway system in shopping malls. And most of the girls are not covered. They don't, it's not an enforced thing. Most people are, it could be any city in Midwest in California or whatever. So it's like, there's so many examples of just humans being human and living together as humans do with people of another culture. In Syria, like you have all these, a lot of Muslims in political power, but they also are celebrating Christmas. You have Muslims going to churches, and there's that was under Bashar al-Assad, not under the new head chopper. But I mean, that was the case. There's so many, that was over years. Same thing for Iraq before we bombed them to the Stone Age. And there's a lot of Christians. There still are Christians living in Iraq, but there were a lot more back before 9/11, and Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11.
Like, I just thought of, on your point on Iraq, there's a quote from a comic book movie. There's a guy named Peacemaker, and he is a psychopath. He's not. He thinks of himself as a peacemaker, an American, but he says, like, he kills a bunch of people in this action scene, and the girl in the scene is like, "I thought that you were all about peace. Like, you call yourself the peacemaker, and he says, I cherish peace with all my heart. I don't care how many men, women, and children I have to kill to get it. And it's like when you just talked about bombing Iraq, and this audience is well aware of this, and many Americans really have had to kind of come to who find their way into a community like this have had to come to terms with that. Not to mention, like, we have veterans on Badlands who are like, yeah, I was in that, and have to do that retroactive deprogramming. But it's kind of like, whoa, there's extremists over here, and we are going to bomb them. We're going to bomb everybody until we find them. And then it's like 20 years down the road, it's like, man, there are a lot of extremists here. It's like, right. So they're like, I mean, we told you that they were extremists here. We just had to bomb them for 20 years to find out where they were. And then they started coming out of the woodwork, just like we said they were gonna.
Yeah, the war on violence. For some reason,
Right.
it never seems to end. No matter how much gasoline we put on that damn fire, it never goes out. I wonder why.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, like it's totally. I mean, irony again of the back and forth. Like, again, if you look at like where do a lot of these radical neocons come from that really came to power during the Cold War, they were formerly, and I know Chris Paul's talked about this, we've talked about this as well. They were all followers of Trotsky. They were Trotskyists, Irving Kristol's, the James Burnhams, the Wolfsteaders, who was like running.
As Chris says, they're leftists. The neocons are leftists, and the leftists are leftists. They're both leftists.
Yeah. And they're the ones who became like the radical right of America. The Frankfurt School Bolsheviks. I mentioned George Lukács, who was the Bolshevik cultural minister of Hungary. He was the founder of the Frankfurt School of political. That's where political correctness as a concept intellectually came out of, and like critical theory came out of his Hungarian network that moved to Germany and Frankfurt, and then that created the Frankfurt School or the Frankfurt Political Institute or whatever. And then they, when Nazism was making it kind of uncomfortable for a lot of these often Jewish intellectuals to like be in Germany, they were given like posh new jobs in MIT, Caltech, Harvard, New School.
Just ride this out for a
few
years.
Right.
Yeah.
I
want to, of course, as we do, we've rabbit trailed for about 90 minutes on great stuff. But I do want to try to get some Arctic stuff out of you before we say goodnight. This is all great stuff. Again, we'll do plenty of more shows on the controlled opposition dynamic. But I think it does loop in and sets us up well for this whole Arctic thing. So for me, as somebody who's kind of new to this story, I've told you before on shows, I've talked to the audience, like I just became fascinated with Russia as part of that controlled opposition dynamic thing. Part of this was because I trained with Russians years ago. Then I noticed Trump and Putin being aligned, and I was becoming a Trump guy, and it made me re-examine the Putin story. So that took me into the 90s. But you wrote an article a couple of years ago on Badlands, and it was a lot of it was about these joint economic projects that were planned, in the past. I think you've talked about the Kennedy administration, but then you've gone way back beyond that to Civil War, pre-Civil War era. And that was for me, as somebody who I think coined the term sovereign alliance, or at least I talk about it all the time. And the Q drops referenced, whatever you think of those, they referenced this alliance between Trump and Putin. When you started talking about these almost partnerships in the Arctic between Russia and the United States, it was like a key for me going into a lock, because I had done research on the Tsars and on the Bolshevik Revolution, and just trying to understand like how did the Soviet Union shit all even come about, and why the timing, like why did it come about? And I'm not saying it's all related to this research, but it feels big to me. It feels like a big why, a big like orbit of whys of why did the empire, use whatever term you want, the globalists, the Prussians, the collectivists, why did they do what they did with the Russians and maybe with the Americans in the Civil War of that same kind of 50-year stretch. When you revisit research about those partnerships at the time, and when you look at some of the news coming out of the Kremlin and occasionally flirted with out of the White House now of joint economic projects, how do you see all of it? It's a big question, but especially the past, just for this audience in particular, maybe kind of enlighten people as to the relationship between the Russians and the Americans at that time, like Civil War era, and maybe some of these projects that were being talked about that we are never told about.
Yeah, I think so. I'll just say first, for people who really want to know this story, I'd suggest if you have the resources, pick up. I did a 4-volume book series called The Clash of the Two Americas, and I did another 4-volume book series before that, starting in 2012, called The Untold History of Canada, Volume 1 to 4, where where a lot of these discoveries kind of came together in a serious way. So that came first, those 4 books on Canada. Then I was able to expand it to the U.S. story, and a big jump off point for me that catalyzed my research originally back in 2007, when I would say that I really got the bug to try to figure this out, this jigsaw puzzle, was this whole battle around, like, why is Canada, you and I have talked about this in previous shows. It's like, why is Canada the only monarchy in Americas? Why? And it had everything to do with the battle to stop this U.S.-Russian alliance from happening at the end of the Civil War. Everything to do with the sale of Alaska to the USA and the attempted extension of rail that Lincoln had begun through British Columbia into the newly purchased Alaska, and onward into the broader Eurasia, where there was already the same people working to save both on the Russian and American side were also the same people negotiating and bringing in Lincoln's American system of political economy through state banking, like the concept that they don't even teach in school anymore, but that was like practiced back then, of productive credit that would be emitted by this network of state banks to provide entrepreneurs, business people, loans for building very specific things that would be conducive to a general vision for the society as a whole. So both the general welfare of the society collectively as a whole would benefit, at the same time as you incentivize individual initiative, spontaneity, ambition of the personality of the individual. So you don't get this Marxist versus libertarian dichotomy of you got to be either for the whole and forget about the part of the individual, or you got to be all about the individual and forget about the whole. False dialectic. In this case, this healthier tradition harmonizes both. And so that was spreading, and the people who were doing it were really bright. They were super smart. You could read their writings. You could read the writings of Count Sergei Witte in Russia as an admirer of Lincoln. And you could read the writings of a lot of the German and French admirers of Lincoln who were bringing this into those countries too and getting assassinated, in many cases at least. So all that to say, that really pieced this missing a lot. It resolved a lot of dissonances in my mind, a lot of paradoxes that I couldn't resolve. It became resolvable. Like you said, it was like a master key that pieced so many things together. And I would say, so I started getting politically active around 2006 with the LaRouche organization that I volunteered with for about a decade from that point on. And that was one of the biggest polarizing things for me, was that Putin came to the United States in, I think it was September of 2007, early on, and he offered to build the Bering Strait Tunnel. And he basically said, and this is covered on Russia Today back in those days, and he offered to George Bush and Cheney, saying something like $60 billion, he said, would be covered by the Russian side if you guys cover the rest, which would be maybe $30 billion from the West, to start building the tunnel, doing the feasibility studies. It's only a gap of about 100 kilometers between Russia and the USA. And actually, because there's two little islands in the middle of the Bering Strait. One is the big and the other is the little Diomede. One is Russian, one is American. There's actually only a 4-mile difference separating Russia and the United States. They're very close. And so that tunnel, which was already being discussed, Lincoln had passed a bill he was about to sign a bill that had already been passed in both houses of Congress in 1864. And he had announced the building up. This is before Alaska was even sold to America. He had already announced the building up of telegraph lines that would extend through the Bering Strait, that would accompany later on rail development. So this has been a long-standing idea that Putin was reviving, and a few of my colleagues at the time decided to take the opportunity to initiate a conference in Ottawa. So I got a chance, my sort of schooling, I guess my real schooling, was to try to understand this as much as I could, because I had to go into meetings with members of parliament. We were basically calling up every Senate office in Canada, member of parliament to speak to their chief of staff or some staff worker, and doing crazy lobbying to communicate that this is even on the table, because our media is not covering it. So we had to do it and then invite them to our conference that was happening in Ottawa. And we did the same thing for a lot of the embassies. We reached out to every possible embassy, and we actually had a lot of really good results. Something like 30 embassies were represented at the conference. It turned out to be pretty big. About a dozen parliamentary offices, a couple of senators showed up, and it was like a 2-day event, and it was pretty big. We brought in experts from Russia. We brought in experts from the USA to speak about the history of this project. I think I've gone further than a lot of them did as far as my research after that, but it was really useful. Piecing a lot together. And so then Putin, obviously it didn't work out. Cheney didn't want to have anything to do with it. So,
well, speaking of controlled opposition dynamic, you might suggest that the Bushes knew that the Obamas were coming in, and Obama was not going to be friendly to the Russians. I mean, I think they're on the same side, the Bushes, the Obamas. It's all controlled opposition dynamic. But, Putin thinks he's coming in to deal in good faith. And, even as a liberal, when I started being disillusioned in the Obama era, part of it was the dynamic with Putin. And I wasn't a Putin guy at that time, but I didn't like how the Obama regime was treating with him, because I was like, this is, man, if Putin is the guy that you guys are saying he is, you should not be dealing with him this way. And if he's not that guy, he was making all these overtures at the time, and then Obama kept dragging his feet, and then we had 2014 happen, which felt like, you got the usual gang of Victoria Nulands of the world and everything to get in there and make sure that wasn't going to happen. But, the reason I wanted to ask Matt about Alaska and everything, it's, I personally saw that the Putin-Trump meeting in Alaska. I mean, I think a lot of their relationship is kayfabe. There were recent videos, I don't know if you've even seen, of a couple of Russian, Lavrov was one of them, I believe, but a couple of Russian, high up guys a couple months ago basically saying, they're like, what do you think about all the things Trump is saying about you and how his rhetoric and everything? And they literally smiled and said, well, there's public communications and then there's private communications through back channels, and we pay attention to those. And, you're going to tell me that Trump and Putin are meeting in Alaska at the site of all these would-be projects, and that they're not sent while they've got NATO in a humiliation ritual between the two of them. In my opinion, Trump is basically, for everybody who thinks Trump wants war with Russia, and he's basically pushing NATO out on an island and daring them to fuck around with Russia while trying to negotiate with Russia while excluding the Europeans from the negotiations. And they're meeting in Alaska and they're talking about joint economic projects. So your research to me implies that part of the reason I'm so encouraged by the Trump-Putin dynamic, and that I don't doom out about it, is because a lot of the signal buried in the noise between them, in my opinion, is hearkening back to a lot of these things that you've unearthed of our previous history. A lot of what they're talking about for a future that hopefully we could see seems to align with a lot of these old projects that you've done this research on.
Yeah, well, that's what it's so interesting about the position that's come up, especially since Trump met with Putin in Alaska. And we were not told about a lot of the details, nor should we have been, because if you start showing all of your cards, well, it's a bad way to play poker. But since then, we've seen an increased orientation around narratives that are being given to the population to prepare the mind to the idea of the Bering Strait Tunnel. Kirill Dmitriev released a certain set of images to Anna Polina Luna, who I don't trust at all as a human being.
Yeah.
But that being said, these images are pretty useful because they came out of the Russian JFK dossier that the Russians had been trying to get to the Americans for a long time, with no desire to be heard whatsoever. And then finally now there's at least a desire, and he put a lot of emphasis on this one particular page that was sort of a sketch by an American civil engineer in 62 or 63 called the Kennedy-Khrushchev Peace Bridge, that he said this should be called now the Trump-Putin Peace Bridge. Yep. And it forced a nice discussion in the population as a whole, and even mainstream media now is forced to touch upon something that they've been trying to ignore for a long time. This is something even the Chinese had endorsed back in 2014. Right. If you look at all of the Chinese mainstream, like state-sponsored media, they were promoting this heavily in 2014-15 based on a U.S.-China-Russia alliance around the Arctic. That's partially, I think, what informed Chinese what became known as the Polar Silk Road, as the Arctic expression of the East-West Silk Road rail corridors and seafaring corridors. There's a northern branch that has fallen out of favor over the last 2-3 years, but I think it's still in play, of the polar version that involves both shipping lanes through the above Russia, but also rail development into the Russian Far East that Putin had made a very high priority for Russia between now and 2040. So, this is something I think is because it's so premised on, it's not coming out of thin air, it's not coming out of a vacuum, it's based on this historic impulse. I feel like it's almost like humanity has been trying to give birth to this idea, and it keeps on getting shoved back in, and it's so unnatural. It's like we want to get this out there, forget the visual. I don't know how people are imagining that imagery, but it's hard to. If there's any cartoonists out there, try to go for it. But no, don't do it. Actually,
it does feel though like this is why. It's funny, people can't make up their mind, the haterade. There's not too many of them, but of course we all have our haters. And alternative, in the same day, I'll be called a doomer by maybe it's Q maximalists who are you're talking about sovereignty and being active in the plan for the future and pushing back and cultivating mandate. That means you're not trusting the plan, right? So I'll get called a doomer by that crowd. But then there's another crowd that calls me a hopium pusher because of my sovereign alliance stance. By the way, speaking of Kirill Dmitriev, I've been poking him every now and again on Twitter and just telling him, just say sovereign alliance, you coward. And I'd expect he knows it's in good faith. But, Dmitriev is posting Q drops. He's saying Trump and Putin are working together, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, Kirill, I've been writing about this for 4 years, and I named it, and just say it instead of doing all this tiptoeing. But it's all just to say, I don't think the hopium of this future relationship, to your point, is hopium. I think it's all predicated on this practicality. And one of the funniest things to me is that I often say it's just the way my mind works. Reverse indicators or negative indicators mean a lot more to me than positive indicators. So by that I mean, in the realm of politicking, as you're very well aware, navigating this world like you do as well, and in academia too, positive indicators, I think, are often illusory, or they're politicking, right? So in other words, if Trump and Putin are at a press conference together, of course they're going to say nice things about each other. If Trump and Macron are at a press conference together, Trump is a guy who actually kind of eschews this dynamic. He often does actually break this dynamic. But generally speaking, positive or active indicators. When I'm saying positive, I don't mean good. I mean positive action indicators. Statements that things are going to get better, etc., don't mean a whole lot to me. What means a lot to me is negative indicators. How are Trump, for example, how are his actions and his policies affecting our so-called allies? And if, what basically everybody agrees about now, whether you're a Trump guy or you're collectivist or you're European or whatever, Trump is basically adversarial with NATO, with the EU, with Ukraine, with all of these different interests. So people will tell me I'm pushing hopium by saying that he's got this partnership with Putin and the Russians and the Chinese and is actually working toward these eventual dynamics that you're talking about, that you've done a lot of research on, that almost came together in the past. And it's like, look at the battle space. Forget what he's saying. Look at what he's doing. And what he's doing is isolating NATO, withdrawing support from the EU and NATO, while getting closer and closer and closer publicly to the Russians. So, I just, and again, you've got figures like Dmitriev cutting through the noise every once in a while and saying, yeah, like, we're going to get this shit figured out. And another point I'd make on that is that when you mention Kennedy and Khrushchev, that's another huge indicator to me of saying, what was the Kennedy administration trying to do at that time? They were trying to normalize relations with Russia. And who stepped in to stop them? Like everybody we were talking about at the beginning of the show. So now you've got Trump, who calls himself a mirror to the Kennedy administration. And look at what he's doing now. You've got Russians in the Kremlin talking about back channels between Trump and Putin. That terminology came about during the Kennedy-Khrushchev era, when they were talking about reviving these projects. So I don't think it's fool's gold at all. I think it's pretty logical to imagine there's a lot more coordination going on between the Russian and American side than we are being told publicly.
Yeah, I think that's it's for me, like I try to use a method, I guess some people call it bicameral thinking, where it's like I try not to stay too rigid. If I truly don't know something, I'm self-aware that I'm hypothesizing. Now there could be a variety of hypotheses that I hold in my mind about how a set of facts might be interpreted, like what might be causing them. So right now, you've got the hypothesis of the Sovereign Alliance, which I'm holding on to because that's never been disproven to me. I'm hoping that that's true and it has historic precedent. At the same time, I'm not fully not black-pilled either, right? Like I'm not fully saying that this isn't. I couldn't say for sure that this isn't a game within a game. It would piss me off if it was. It would suck. But at the same, is Kirill Dmitriev part of a Rosicrucian game within a game that might be actually a trap similar to what caused the 30 Years' War?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Right.
But at the same time, it's useless to put all of my eggs in that basket because that doesn't lead anywhere. There's enough reason to hope, reasonably so, that this better plan is in play. And we'll see as evidence comes up, so that bicameral thinking is what I try to encourage. Stay flexible.
Totally.
Don't go all white pill or all black pill.
Yeah.
Try to avoid that. Keep your creativity intact. Yeah.
Right. I wanted
and somebody
to,
said, I just noticed that somebody had commented, why wouldn't I trust Anna Polina Luna? I know I kind of just threw that out there. It's because watch my video series, which I'll be playing on Mondays pretty soon. Every Monday night, I'm going to do a little movie night because I've produced with my wife a lot of films with our studio now for the past 3 years. And we're doing a series called The Hidden Hand Behind UFO. We've done 4 episodes. They're about an hour each. And the essential thesis is getting people to be aware of the new world religion that's being set up for the new age that is premised around the idea of ET gods that are going to be some confluence of ETs and AI and time travel AI that will be given to us as a new set of supernatural creator entities that we will be expected to be in awe of and think that that's what Jesus was or Muhammad or whatever. So that's what's being, if you take that in mind, this new world religion, and then you look at Anna Polina's history as a personality and her role within the network that is pushing it, for me, that's why I don't trust her. And that's what I'll just say, that person who put that comment in with a question mark.
We're very open at Badlands to shitting on anybody we please, whether we're right or wrong about it, because it's you never know. I did want to revisit a little bit Alaska. So obviously Trump Putin met there. It's kind of interesting. You know, this is an area of history I've not done a lot of research on, but I kind of wanted to revisit the idea you mentioned of Canada. Man, again, this was one of the big keys to me, and I think, as you said, we don't know what we don't know, but a real confidence boost, I think, for thinkers like us and people in this audience is when you independently come to the same conclusion as another thinker that you respect through a completely different pathway, right? So you've done all this research, and you're talking about that a lot of your research started out examining the Canada question in terms of the empire, the monarchy, all that, right? Eventually that led you to like slot Canada in not so much as a puzzle piece, but almost as an anti-puzzle piece between the Russians and the Americans, right? And for me, I didn't know the histories there, but I have been talking about for a couple of years, like the Canadians as this, to my wife, who is Canadian, I've been saying for years, Canada to me feels like the perfect proxy experiment state for new age collectivism, like new age, new world order democracy, and that it has helped to create this separation or keep the separation between the US, Russia, and China in particular, without knowing your research at that time. So the reason I want to revisit that is, do you think the Alaska purchase, you know, what's the signal around the Alaska purchase? Do you think that the Americans and the Russians, Tsar Alexander at the time, had any awareness of this and were actually doing this to help, like, in other words, was there some counter-globalist insurgency going on between the Russians and the Americans at that time? The Alaska purchase is framed in hindsight as this big mistake by the Russians, but with the Canada problem there, I wonder if it wasn't this big mistake and if it was actually a bit of a strategic counter to the empire's attempt to keep the empires, to keep the Russians and the Americans separated.
So I'm going to read to you 3 quotes that I pulled together during my original research. And the first one is from 1860 from Ambassador Stoeckel, the Russian ambassador to the USA, to Tsar Alexander II, saying, quote, "If the United States should win mastery of our possessions, then British Oregon, which is essentially British Columbia, would be squeezed together by the Americans from the north and south and would hardly be able to escape." Earlier on, General Muravyev, a leading general of the Russian army, had already promoted the sale of Russia's Alaska to the USA to the Tsar, stating, this is a quote, "Due to the present amazing development of railroads, the United States will soon spread over all of North America. We must face the fact that we will have to cede our North American possessions to them." 1853. That was actually only sold in 1867. Another quote I'll just read here, okay? This is from Alexander II, saying, in the autumn of 1862, and this is after the Civil War, he's giving an interview to Wharton Barker, an American industrialist and newspaper editor. He says, "In the autumn of 1862, the governments of France and Great Britain proposed to Russia, in a formal but not in an official way, the joint recognition by European powers of the independence of the Confederate States of America. My immediate answer was, I will not cooperate in such an action and I will not acquiesce. On the contrary, I shall accept the recognition of independence of the Confederate States by France and Great Britain as a casus belli for Russia. And in order that the governments of France and Great Britain may understand that this is no idle threat, I will send a Pacific fleet to San Francisco and an Atlantic fleet to New York. All this I did because of love for my own dear Russia. Acted thus because I understood that Russia would have more serious tasks to perform if the American Republic, with advanced industrial development, were broken up, and Great Britain should be left in control of most branches of modern industrial development. William Seward, Lincoln's Secretary of State, who survived his own assassination attempt on the night that Lincoln was killed, was the guy who was working with Stoeckel for 2 years to broker and finalize the sale, the treaty, for $7 million. It was called Seward's Folly. And Seward was also a big promoter of two things, which is one, annexing Canada, because he recognized that Canada was a giant British psyop designed to just basically, that's where Lincoln's killer was organized and given payment. James Bulla. James Bulla was the head of Confederate intelligence for Europe. He's the guy who brokered the deal for the English to manufacture and then give these warships like the SS Alabama to the Confederates. That was Bullock. Now, Bullock was the uncle of Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt saw him as his hero. He helped Bullock write his biography, a sanitized biography of the Confederates that he then got to all of the different congressional leaders. That's Teddy Roosevelt. Now, Bullock was caught in, like, this is actually known already now for about 80 years, giving wire transfers from London through his own Confederate funds to Booth, John Wilkes Booth. So Booth got money from a $30,000 wire transfer signed by Bullock, Teddy Roosevelt's uncle, head of Confederate intelligence, to banks in Montreal that were then sending them to J.J. Thompson, who was the head of Confederate intelligence with George Saunders in Montreal, Canada, which is where John Wilkes Booth was stayed for 5 weeks. And he described during that 5 weeks how he had very little recollection of what even happened to him. Because why? I think that Montreal was also a cult center, as was Ontario
MK
and
Ultra,
Buffalo.
That's the MK Ultra research. A lot of people in this audience, I know Zach Payne has done digs on that. Quebec was a breeding ground for a lot of, the what we used to think of as psyops. I think people used to think of psyops as like the science fiction version, which is actually science fact, but MK Ultra type stuff, right, is what people thought of as psyops, like literally psychologically programming people Clockwork Orange style. Now we know that, we're all being programmed that way. But all of which you're saying, I think what's mind-blowing about this stuff, I just saw Rocket Savvy in the chat said, this is the stuff I want to hear. The Russia-US alliance was an idea from the 1860s. It's again, using a negative indicator, it's like, if you're not sure how active or positive the intention of the alliance was, what you're quoting out of the Russian side at that time is a recognition of the mutual enemy, which really, my framing of the Sovereign Alliance and when I named it in the Righteous Russia series, that was my framing. The terminology I use is often framed as positive and it's alliance based, etc., active. But my opinion is that it's a defensive, it's a preemptive alliance. It's a mutual enemies alliance, more so than the Russians and the Americans are best friends and need to join together, right? Like, I think that's less it. And I think it's more, we got to fucking do something about the globalist cartel. And to your, it kind of sounds like that's exactly the dynamic that was going on from the American Republic side and the Russian side at that time, of being like, hey, we may work together, we may not, but the empire is a problem for both of us, and Canada is a keystone in that problem, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, and I mean that's the proximity of the Russia sale in March 1867 to the creation of the Canadian Confederation. So that's another polemic I've often used, and I realized that British didn't have one anti-American confederacy in play in the 1860s. They had two, and one of them succeeded, one of them failed. So the Southern Confederacy failed. The Northern Confederacy, since Canada is confederate, that's where the British North America Act came into being, that was signed into act in London in July of 1867. So it was a big race around that because it was known that the forces, including the pro-Lincoln forces in Canada, were working very hard to collaborate to make this happen. Either use Britain's weakened stance after the Civil War and America's very strong position to either allow Canada to become its own republic or to just join with the United States as Seward and Charles Sumner had. And if not, you had British Columbia, which had a huge annexation movement. They were being strained heavily. And the only commerce that British Columbia had was with California. They didn't have any commerce with the East Coast colonies, way on the Pacific side. And the annexation movement was very clear that they recognized that their only future was in having rail from the United States extend through and bring commerce and everything else, which would have brought it right into Alaska. So, that was the trajectory. And it really took this, on the one hand, a bunch of bribes. Like, this is the thing. This is the thing that I'm seeing as well with Mark Carney today as a danger point, because I see the exact same evil formula that was done in the 1870s and 80s to keep Canada locked into the British Empire. It was done through a bribe. So we Transcontinental Railway, it was promised to the British Columbians that as long as you stay loyal to the crown, we will build you your own Canada-based rail. We'll eliminate your debts. We'll allow you to have development. You can have industry, but just stay loyal to the crown. And stupid Canadians accepted the bribe. They didn't do the more difficult thing that would have been much more healthy for future generations. They did the easy thing. They got progress to a certain degree, but it was limited. That's why our population is still so underdeveloped today. That our only development is right locked into the U.S. border. We don't have any development of the Canadian North, and that was by design to keep populated but happy, right? That's why we're a first world country with electricity and these things. Now, does that mean that having electricity and having a rail line was bad? No, it was good, but it was the British Empire allowing a lesser good prevent a higher good from happening, right? To keep us locked into the game board so that they could sabotage the thing a little bit later down the line. And that's what I see right now with Carney having been brought into play. What he said is to, he's ideologically green, anti-growth. That's his religion. You can read his book, Values. He's clear. However, he's willing to put all of that ideology aside for the time being because his masters deem it so, that it's necessary to allow for Canada, allow for Alberta to have its oil, its pipelines, its progress, to allow for, high-speed rail that he's calling for in order to essentially sabotage a greater good. And my fear right now is he's trying to get close to the Chinese, the Indians, by saying, look, we're a new Canada now. We're all being threatened by big bad USA.
Yeah.
And trust us. You couldn't trust us before, but now you can because we like development. And I think he's allowing a certain amount to pacify the Albertans, because the Albertans have a big independence movement because they've been constricted. They have all these resources, but they are not allowed to develop. They keep on getting their knees cracked by Ottawa. But now I think you're seeing a different position being played by Ottawa to say, okay, no, we will not. We're not doing the carbon trading. We're not doing the cap and trade. We're not doing carbon tax. We're going to have the pipelines. We'll facilitate it even. Just stay loyal to the crown. And it's the John A. Macdonald 1870 to 1885 game plan that they're bringing back into play. But now the target is both the USA, but especially China. That's their new target. That was playing the role of Lincoln's America. Now it's sort of China that they're trying to sabotage to weaken the China-Russia alliance and to get China locked in and addicted to resources from Canada that could later on be closed as a tap and have China have less access to the Russian market. So that's part of what's in play. I don't think it's going to work, but I'm just saying it's there.
Yeah.
And a lot of Canadians have no fucking clue. Like, most have no idea that this is what this is. So
I had written about some of the dialectic going on between Trump and Canada in 2025 and had said the irony there to what you're saying is that Donald Trump has, I agree with the risks that you're laying out of what is going on in Canada. The funny thing is I kind of had spun it positive by saying the great irony that my Canadian in-laws do not understand about what Donald Trump has done with this dialectic is he has tricked empire-based collectivist Canadians into nationalist rhetoric against the most infamous nationalist on the global game board, right? So like and I had said in that article, Mark Carney, a globalist central banker, literally, like a central banker of the British Empire, like as elite, deep state, bad guy as it gets, is going on to press conferences espousing nationalist Canada First rhetoric as a response to Donald Trump. And I agree with you that it's complete bullshit, but I try to look for the silver linings, and I say...
I appreciate that. I'll go with that.
If Donald Trump has put a Canadian communist central banker into the position of pretending to be the Canadian version of Donald Trump, then I don't think things are going very well for the public narrative of classical Canadianism, right? Like this, to your point about Alberta, the fact that they have to appeal to Albertans right now means shit ain't going so well for like the Trudeau timeline that we were supposed to be on, right? Like there is this rise of real nationalist sentiment in Canada, and I think it is being accelerated by Donald Trump, ironically. That's my
your show. I won't try to undo your silver lining, man. I'll
All right, man. I've kept you for over 2 hours. I did want my usual trick, as you know, is to ask you a huge question as a last question before you get out of here.
I can do a small, short answer to a big question if you want something totally unsatisfying. I don't mind.
Hey, I'll keep you here for another hour if you want, but I'll leave you with a big question so you can answer big, small, somewhere in between, whatever you want to do. So we've been talking about, I write about the Sovereign Alliance a lot. You talk about a lot of this history of, I would characterize that as a similar framework that almost happened in the late 19th century. Mutual enemies, mutual empire of enemies, and republics that were kind of trying to give each other hands. You might even suggest that maybe if the Sovereign Alliance was more direct at that time, we could have avoided a lot of these issues, right? Like maybe if the Russians and the Americans were more unified, they could have stood a better chance against all the against all the subversion. All of which is to say, though, to spin this to include China in this. You've been doing all this research on the Arctic. You know a ton of history of all three of these nations. I think on a practical level, it's interesting to look at what Donald Trump is doing. This question sucks, I know, in terms of how I'm framing it, but 2025, one of the big storylines has been Donald Trump and these trade wars, right? He's essentially breaking what we have been told is modern trade, the rules-based international order, all that kind of stuff, right? And my opinion on that is that ironically what Trump is doing, even with his tit for tats with Russia and China regarding trade, is actually kind of accelerating us toward the very multipolar vision that Putin and Xi Jinping promote. And when you look at the Arctic, do you see the Arctic as a existential threat to globalism as we've known it? And by that I mean the economic model of globalism. If we do get, forget Sovereign Alliance, forget all that, just pure economics. If we get this real area of cooperation that would have to include the US, Russia, and China de facto in that region because of the geography, would that break a stranglehold that the globalist empire has wielded, essentially by controlling all trade running through the Atlantic and Europe and
It
everything.
would, yeah,
I
no,
know
it
that's
definitely would.
not meant to be a leading question, but that's part of what I've been looking at in terms of the economic framework.
Well, the way I see it is like the way globalization has been wired is there's a very certain strict. So when would you say that globalization began in your mind? How would you what's a jump on point you would go to as like one of those important, like probably around this time?
From the American perspective, my layman's answer would be the 70s, but I think it accelerated in the re-accelerated in the 90s. I have been a little black-pilled in hindsight on I almost got white-pilled on the Reagan era. I was like, oh, well, if Trump's good, maybe Reagan was good. And maybe he was, but, I've been corrected on some of that because Reagan didn't necessarily do as much to harm globalism as we've been told he did. But it feels to me like 70s was big globalist push in the U.S. and the 90s with the Clintons in particular, the Bush Senior and the Clintons. But curious what you.
I think you're right to go to the 70s. Most people wouldn't do that. They would go to the 90s. They would go maybe to the Reaganomics of the Austrian school 80s, but they wouldn't go to the 70s. And I think you're correct. That I think the same. And I think that when you look at the Trilateral Commission's planning for what they did, because they were largely behind George Shultz, Big Brzezinski, Kissinger, David Rockefeller, like these are all trilaterals who were setting the stage, and they were following a manifesto or a program that had been developed by, number one, a Rockefeller-funded operation called the Club of Rome that was based upon utilizing linear binary computer modeling, cybernetics modeling systems in order to try to like model the entire economy, which had never been done before in a practical way. It had been done conceptually, but it hadn't been done practically, right? So Rand Corps, these things were like doing models, but they weren't really guiding policy on the economic level until the trilaterals came in over the dead body of Robert F. Kennedy. And I think Nixon probably seemed to push back against it in a variety of ways. He was also didn't fully understand it, so he didn't really know what this thing was half the time.
He didn't know how big it was, it kind of feels like, right?
Yeah, and how sophisticated and it was always like several steps ahead of him all the time, you know. So even though he had some good impulses, he was bewildered by it. And as was Carter, as was I think Ford, they were kind of. But all that to say, so the one of the aspects of the cybernetics systems analysis of control mechanism. Cybernetics is the science of control. It's basically utilizing feedback loops with a central nervous system of a sort of executive branch that can see a highly compartmentalized machinery of a thing, whatever that thing might be. In this case, human society, with its subdepartments and subdepartments, and nobody within the subdepartments is allowed to see what the whole is. Right? Everybody's trained to be my little Oompa Loompas, and only the executive sort of elect are permitted to sort of have the higher understanding to see the whole. So very little input with a small inner club to get a big effect. That's how these conspiracies kind of work. Most people don't know that they're part of it. They're broken mentally. That's what Frankfurt School did. So now so the thing that is required is a rigid framework, a rigid sort of narrative in which the apparent illusion of spontaneity and liberty of action within the parts can occur. And so they basically said we have to impose a closed system, whereas formerly it was believed throughout most of American history that we don't live in a closed system. We don't believe in Malthus. We believe in human progress, of creativity, of artistic and scientific excellence, and that we could always mentally and physically leap outside of those limits to growth. That was the conventional wisdom for most of the time. And then all of a sudden they're like, no, we have to stop.
Vision, the real humanist vision.
Yeah, exactly. And so that had to stop. And the new thing was, okay, we have these limits that we currently have regarding what we currently use technologically, the oil deposits on the earth, the mineral and agricultural land areas that are exploitable. We can put those inputs into a computer and then chart out how long based on a certain growth function of population growth, we can sustain the entropy, the winding down of the system before it reaches a heat death, and it will inevitably collapse, says their computer models that don't allow for human creativity. So all of the supposed private enterprise and everything else, the buying, the selling, the stock market wheels and deals of the futures markets and the spot markets, the speculative derivative contracts that appear to be capitalism are not actually capitalism. They're bounded by the strict closed that doesn't allow people to leave the limits of the game board. It's a very game theory system.
Yeah.
You can't break the rules of the game. Everybody has to play by the limited rules. Now, the Arctic is one of those domains that breaks the rules. It forces human cognitive thought to play a causal role in planning multi-generationally, because it's going to take you like probably 25 years to finalize the thing. You're creating new relationships qualitatively that are not existent now. So again, you're breaking the rules that way. You're going to be opening up the door to a whole slew of new discoveries and problem solving that will necessarily be made along the way, because a lot of the shit that we're going to have to deal with by building in permafrost in the high Arctic, building tunneling in a high tectonic area like the Bering Strait, high tectonic. I mean, there's a lot of earthquake. So you got to come up with new engineering skill sets. You're probably going to want to have some sort of a floating tunnel that's like bounded by anchors, so that there's like some mobility of the tunnel where it won't snap if there should be a big earthquake. It could still move. But that's something we've never done before. So we just know it sort of conceptually, but that's going to have all sorts of spin-offs into the civilian sector that you can't even imagine.
Yeah.
So
like a new space race, basically. In terms of the technological impact, maybe.
Totally. Yeah, exactly. And at the same time as you're opening up the Arctic, you're going to be also getting discoveries along as you're building science cities and things in the Arctic that will happen. Dome cities that are going to probably be nuclear powered, because that's really efficient. You're going to also be learning how to live off the land in a way that will benefit space explorers as well, in a very hostile terrain, which the Arctic is, and so is the moon, and so is Mars. So over time, you're going to be able to feed a lot of these lessons into what you're doing. All the new international space stations that are going to replace the current one. You're going to do all of these things, right? That'll open up the doors to new platforms that we can always creatively build on. And in that context, things like AI, I think, can serve a really positive, useful service to the species instead of being our dystopic, managers of the human herd.
Yeah, I refer to AI as a human extender, and I try to say that as an objective term of saying that's good or bad, right? It's a human amplification technology, a force multiplier, potentially an exponential force multiplier, but that is good or bad. It's either very, very good or very, very bad, I think what doesn't come into this conversation a lot is that it can be both at the same time, right? Like it depends on who's using it, and probably both groups are using it at the same time for opposite intentions.
Yes, and that's why I think if you have a stagnant society as a closed system, then the AI will always necessarily be used to maintain the closed system, which is maintain the stasis, which is manage the human herd by giving us better ways of turning our minds off and, giving us better forms of entertainment or whatever else. Not even better, just simply more entertainment that we adapt to as it becomes actually more mediocre in time, that we don't even notice that AI replacing human musicians and content creators. We don't even notice quality dissipating because we just adapt to the mediocrity over time. And so that would be but if you have always a plan to go to the next horizon, the new frontiers, as JFK called his policy, right? New frontiers. If that's your Tao, and you're always leaning into like, well, what's the next thing we need to figure out as a society, which is always going to be transgenerational. Then I think your individuals who make up that society will appreciate what it means to be as a transcendental quality that you can't replicate with a machine, but you can use these algorithms in order to, like you said, right, just be our assistants to do the things that humans couldn't do, like in hostile terrain, in Earth, like mining in deep crust or deep earth or lunar or Martian mining, which might be dangerous for human flesh, but you might want a thinking machine to figure things out, or maybe some automated systems to build a dam that you don't want to like waste people's times with. You could do these things. So you just always have to have the mind as active, and the Empire doesn't want us to have an active mind shaping human society. They want us to just remove our thinking and basically let the wannabe gods of Olympus do the thinking for us.
Man, it's funny that answer did not go where I thought it would, and in a very good way in terms of the art, because I was thinking about the economic impact, and not economic impact, I should say. I was thinking about the economic, almost pincer move that the Arctic Alliance would leverage on the current rules-based order, which you started with. But I love where you went with that, and maybe that's a good place for us to end. What it made me think of was, my whole thing is the narrative, the war of stories, all of that. Part of why I do that is not just because I'm a writer and I'm attracted to stories and all that. Part of it is I recognize that, as you said earlier with bicameral thinking, by the way, guys, that's like a reverse drinking game. I think Matt is the first guest who said bicameral before I said it. So I don't know if that means you don't drink or you drink way more because that happened. But you mentioned earlier the bicameral thinking, holding the good, holding the bad in your mind at the same time and trying to kind of map, Chris Paul and I talk about this all the time. And I think that the reason I gravitate to stories is, while I understand people can lie to me with the stories that they're telling, it is also true that our histories, our past, our present is unknowable to a large degree. Even with all the research that you do, right? You probably you go down a whole rabbit hole, and then 2 years later you find some new puzzle piece that inverts your previous understanding of that rabbit hole. So even the real history that you find out can constantly kind of shift with the benefit of new information or finding out that information was false. All of which is to say, I pay attention to the stories that these modern players are laying out. And they can be lying, but here's what I like about the Sovereign Alliance players that I talk about, and what I don't like about what I see as I call it the Axis and Allies inversion. I think our so-called allies, which Trump has literally called them that, in quotes, our so-called allies, France, the UK, Canada, Japan, he refers to them as our so-called allies. I don't think he's talking about tariffs, people. I think he's talking about the allies. What is their story? The story of Germany, the story of Canada, the story of the UK, of France in the modern day is some mix of, we are fucked, the future is bad, and you, the people, need us to make it as unbad as possible for you, by us taking your resources and allocating them in the way we see fit, right? That is the story of the rules-based international order. You'll own nothing and be happy. The weather is going to change. The globe is going to heat up or cool down, whichever day of the week it is. You're all fucked. You're a poison on the globe, right? The story of Donald Trump, whatever you think of Donald Trump, the story that Donald Trump presents is that we can make America great again. We can go into a golden age, the likes of which they've told you we cannot. What is the story of Vladimir Putin? A multipolar world sits on the horizon. We can reforge the republic. We can enter a new period of cooperation and mutual accelerationism. What is Xi Jinping? Multipolarity, cooperative competition, acceleration into new frontiers. Mohammed bin Salman, he's building cities in the desert that are dwarfing anything that's been done in the United States for the last 50 years. And, these guys are the guys I talk about as a sovereign alliance. So what you made me think of with the Arctic and all the second order effects that cooperation could have there is that call it hopium, call it whatever, but I'd rather be following that story than the story telling me you're fucked and you need to trust us and nobody else, right? That's kind of like the globalist story is losing because the globalist story sucks. And the sovereign story is winning because the sovereign story, I think, is the human story. So it doesn't mean bad stuff isn't going to happen along the way, but I guess that's generally when you see these joint economic projects. If, to your earlier point on the bicameral thinking, if and when we start seeing real movement on joint projects between the US, Russia, and China, I think that would be the biggest actual proof that the future actually could be as bright as what you were just laying out.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I think that that's it. And when the proof is in the pudding, right? And I mean, if I see something really, really good happen as an action, I will support and that'll win over more of my hypothesis, my tendency to the good, right hypothesis. And as soon as I see really bad things happening, that'll lend more credence to my more negative hypothesis, and I'll act accordingly in time. But we'll see.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. No, I appreciate
well, Matt
this,
and I are going to announce, Matt doesn't know this, but I am announcing joint economic projects between Matt and I. If they fuck it all up in the Arctic, like we can just crowdfund it, right? Rumble rants,
easy.
Badlands boosts, buy the books, all that kind of stuff. So we'll figure it out no matter what. But thanks for joining the show, Matt. I think it was another great one. Have to have you back for a million more of these. Can you tell people where to find your stuff, specifically on this topic? You were talking about your books earlier. What's the best place for people to find that stuff?
I guess the easiest way would be to go to canadianpatriot.org. And you can find in the main menu section like books, and there's like a little slidey bar banner thing where one of those images that you'll see is watch our movies, and most of the movies are freely available. I'd say also my Substack is pretty useful, I hope. And we just released a film actually last week called Edgar Allan Poe's Final Mystery: A Tale of Two Murders. It's a new thing that comes out of my Revenge of the Mystery trilogy. And it's the story of what Edgar Allan Poe was actually doing with his stories and with his poetry, and with the Society of Cincinnati that he was also a member of, doing battle with a certain occult penetration of America that I go through in that film. And that's available on Substack right now. But it's behind a $5 paywall, but it's $5, So if you want to watch a movie, there's that.
It takes a lot of time, it's tough being in this space, right? Because you feel gross asking for money. We do most of our stuff for free. I didn't produce a book for free, you got to pay money for that. But it's tough because it doesn't, for people that find value in what we do, and our audience is very generous, but we still get hit with those kind of complaints, and it's like, people that enjoy the shows and they enjoy the content, like how many hours do you think goes into being as retarded as people like us can get about things? Like $5, guys. It's a cup of coffee. So we appreciate the people who do subscribe to us. I said Matt contributes to the Badlands Substack. If you guys subscribe over there, you're helping the Substack team. But we all have individual platforms as well. One of the things that's been great about John for years is that he has always encouraged everybody at Badlands to not only do their own thing, but to promote their own thing as well. So support Matt's Substack. What's the URL for that? Is it Matt Ehret?
Yeah, I've got it here. It's matthewehret.substack.com.
Good stuff. When you guys, for my opinion, buy books, do all that kind of stuff. But if you guys are looking for one of the best ways to support independent content creators, Substack is one of the best platforms for it. They're just, they really take very low fees compared to a lot of other platforms. So far, I have seen very little cancel culture behavior out of Substack that we've seen on many other platforms. So it's a great way to support Matt and to support pretty much most of the people at Badlands have their own Substack going. So, all right, Matt, thanks a lot. Thanks for joining the show. I will see you next time. And I don't know. we'll figure out what those joint economic projects are. Only if I was wrong about the Sovereign Alliance. But
okay, well, it could be some form of a comic book or something, or we'll make it work. Okay,
yeah,
all right,
man. All right, Matt.
But the Sovereign
I'll talk to
Alliance
you
is
later.
going to save the day. It's fine. Okay, bye.
Yeah. Oh, I took myself out of my own show. I will hang out with you guys for about a half hour here. I'll take you into Q After Dark. Q After Hours. Is that what it is? Q After Hours. My brain keeps wanting to say Q After Dark, and I think that they should rename it that. Maybe sexual undertones. Might get a little weird for some people. But also a little spooky. I just think, workshop it. They can workshop it, but I think it's better than Q After Hours in terms of that name. I'll take you guys up to that. We'll screw around a little bit. I have to take a very short break. If I am not here in 1 minute, I will be back. So don't freak out about it. But thanks a lot to Matt Ehret for joining the show. I hope that was a good one for you guys. And please, by the way, I always forget to ask, like the show if you like conversations like that. When I get back in a minute, I want to kind of express a little thought I have of looping why I like discussions like that into some of the larger stories about whether it's Q drops or Trumpism and trust the plan, etc. Given that many of you probably know Trump is doing a Q post tonight and retweeting Q-isms and everything, which I think is true. Again, longtime follower of the drops from 2017, believe that there is a Patriot plan. But I think discussions like this make me both really excited about the quote unquote plan and sober about the I'll express this out when I come back. I think it's both hope and what Matt was saying, bicameral of some realism in there too that I think is necessary. Otherwise, listen to us sell you some tallow.
Before skincare went synthetic, people used something simple, something real, tallow. Grass-fed and finished beef tallow is packed with vitamins A, D, E, and K. Nutrients your skin actually knows what to do with. It locks in moisture, restores elasticity, and defends against winter dryness. No water, no preservatives, and no BS. Unlike plant oils or chemical creams, tallow mimics your skin's own structure. Elbows, hands, knees, post-shave, anywhere your skin's crying for real moisture. Perfect for gifting or keeping your own skin soft when the cold hits. Visit softdisclosure.com and use promo code Badlands for 15% off. Ancient care, modern truth.
Soft disclosure.
Yeah, don't freak out. Don't freak out, guys. Daddy's home. I always like to think of the one person who happened across the stream when there was nobody here. And for that one moment, they were like, why am I in the place I am in right now? Why did I happen across this stream of this guy's room with really cool looking stuff in it? I don't know why you ended up there. Another sponsor I wanted to shout out is our friends at Rise Attire, who have a pretty perfect little product line in keeping with the theme of tonight's show. What is the Sovereign Alliance? The Sovereign Alliance are a collection of leaders and countries that are aligned not in the vision for their countries, but against a vision that has been thrust upon them. I believe that the Sovereign Alliance is less a battle for something and more a battle against something. They are against globalism, collectivism. They are against the rules-based international order.
Sovereign Alliance, the latest addition to Badlands Rise merch, available now at badlandsmedia.tv/rise.
Get your Sovereign Alliance merch, guys. Some good shit. It's real, by the way. Matt and I aren't going to have to save the Arctic by ourselves. We are willing to, but I don't think we're actually going to have to. So the thought I wanted to finish there was that I think it's funny. It's bicameral It's bicamerally encouraging and sobering. I'm not going to use the word discouraging. I think it's sobering. When you look at the 1860s, I think it, with Matt's research and commentary, some of the stuff that I've been putting out there, Ghost as well, you start to see that while this audience, while a lot of us focus on, man, the deep state, the cabal, the dark powers of the world have gone back a long ways. Any rock you turn over in this world, you start finding the strings connecting to this and to that and to this other thing and to this other group and this other network, and they're all collectivists, right? The dark forces in this world have been coordinating for a long time against us. But there have also been moments in history that I think reflect the current moment more times than we know. In other words, most of you guys are here because you believe that there's a plan, whether you came in through the Q drops or through the MAGA movement or whatever it is. You think that there's a plan, meaning a counterinsurgency against the insurgency, against the deep state. Donald Trump's among the leaders here. Some of you have followed me down these rabbit holes of saying that there's such a thing as a sovereign alliance. Trump is not alone. The Q drops obviously referenced that. It's all very positive, right? And sometimes we at Badlands, not all of us, but some of us can take some flack. I think myself, Chris, and John are the poster children for this, apparently. But of being a little bit more sober about saying, hey, can't take your foot off the gas here. And then people can accuse us of, oh, you're not trusting the plan, you're not doing whatever. Well, this isn't the only time there's been a plan. I think that we are doing a disservice to use the American founding and the American Revolution as an example here. I think we do a disservice sometimes to the founding fathers by talking about that period of time as like just this kinetic operation and this kinetic counterinsurgency, this political maneuver, it was against taxation without representation, blah, 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 blah. The more you look into that stuff, I've actually had a lot of conversations with G-Money about this, Bitcoin, and how similar that decentralized network was to what the founders were doing. We've talked about on this show in recent months and at recent Badlands events and Guard events, the idea that the founding fathers were never fully unified, ever, ever, ever. Some of them were fucking killing each other. And that friction was a feature of what they were doing and not a bug. But in the context of this conversation and trust the plan, don't trust the plan, etc., there was a lot of periods in history where a plan, a sovereign, good white hat plan, was coming together organically. Some people were more read in on it, right? Like during the Revolution, we're talking about the founding fathers. There was figures that we come to know now, the Jeffersons of the world, the Franklins of the world, the Washingtons, the Adams, who were, maybe they were the less than 10 of that era, right? Those are the guys we remember. Those are like, they were working on this fifth generation, not even fifth generation, but like this fifth dimensional plan. They were thinking well beyond the British Empire. They were envisioning a world, a republic that we had maybe not seen since Rome or had not seen at all. That took vision, that took coordination, that took this white hat plan to accomplish. But there was all these setbacks along the way. And then even though they largely accomplished their goal, I would say most of us would agree early on, we then had the War of 1812. We then had the Civil War. We had World War I. We had World War II. Like, obviously, things haven't been going so hot, right? And I think that's the reason you get pushback sometimes from people like me, who is a Q person, about the damages of trust the plan rhetoric. Because if you're looking into this sovereign alliance theory or joint economic projects in the Arctic, etc., this isn't new. The encouraging thing about that is that there have been good guys in the shadows or in the light trying to bring about this humanist, sovereign, good, godly vision for humanity and for cooperation for centuries, for decades, for generations, for centuries. That's encouraging, right? The sobering aspect of it is, you think the Russians and the Americans of the 1860s weren't aware at how complicated this was and how delicate it was culturally, politically, kinetically, economically? I saw people in chat earlier basically taking the Wikipedia paragraph out of the Alaska Purchase and saying, yeah, the Russians needed money. That is your official history as told to you by a Prussian American public education system that does not teach you anything about the coordination between the Russian Republic and the American Republic of the 19th century, because they don't want you to think about that. They want you to think that the America of the 60s, 70s, 80s, and to today is the America that the founding fathers had a vision for. It is absolutely not. It's an abomination. And if you want any more, evidence of that, listen to Chris Paul, watch the No Treason podcast on Sunday nights before this show with our newest Badlander there. And sorry, I lost my train of thought. Jonathan Drake is what I was trying to say. I was going to say Jonathan French, who is a old author friend of mine. One of the few who didn't betray me, actually. But no, it's Jonathan Drake, not Jonathan French. These ideas are not new. It's encouraging, but it's also sobering. Guess what? The Sovereign Alliance plan, whatever they wanted to fucking call it in the 1860s, it didn't come together. Why? Because the collectivists managed to get the U.S. in a pincer that Ehret was talking about of a civil war, a confederacy in the South, and I know there's a lot of revisionist history about that as well, and one in the North. Controlled opposition dynamic all the way down, as Chris Paul would say, turtles all the way down. There is a real risk of that happening. Doesn't have to be 2025, but it could be 2045. So if you only trust the plan rhetoric and you don't learn about these histories, then I think you're doing yourself a disservice, and you're potentially doing this whole plan a disservice by adopting that kind of rhetoric. And that's why you get pushback on some of that kind of stuff, using the general U, obviously. The plan doesn't just actualize itself. It has to be actualized. You have to embrace a vision of a sovereign alliance. You have to embrace a vision of multipolarity. You have to learn about when it almost happened in the past and why it didn't happen in the past. And, what's funny is what's taking over the zeitgeist right now in the MAGA world is this intra-MAGA schism. And I think it's a psyop, of course. I think it's a nuanced psyop. But what's kind of funny is if you follow a lot of the Fuentes rhetoric all the way to its endpoint, just in this topic, in this theater, when it comes to things like the Sovereign Alliance, it's going to sound an awful lot like leftist collectivist rhetoric about the Sovereign Alliance, right? How many America first, and it's like, hey, I like Steve Bannon, cool, whatever, but sometimes it's really fucking annoying, the rhetoric coming out of those shows, and it's like maybe it's waking up the normies or whatever. You hear them talk about Russia and China, and it's like they are just in the earliest innings of starting to talk to their audience like they're not fucking idiots, and saying, well, at least Putin's a guy we might be able to deal with, but China bad, right? It's like, well, they could say the same shit about the Americans, about the U.S. How's the U.S. been going for everybody? So when the controlled opposition dynamic, when the quote-unquote America First movement is telling you to fear the Russians and the Chinese and all this shit, while they're also telling you that we need to back out of the NATO alliance, which I agree with, it's like, is this waking up the normies, or is this cementing controlled opposition paradigms that we have existed in since the 19th century? That's why I have lost a lot of patience for wake up the normies rhetoric. The normies are fucking idiots, okay? That's why they're not here. They don't have a right to determine our future. We have to self-determine our future. That means engaging in this subject matter and not giving a shit what normies think about what you think about the Russians or the Chinese or NATO or any of that stuff. I think that Donald Trump has done the best job you could do about waking up the normies, and I think that there will be more that happens that helps to wake more of them up. But I trust the plan because I think that the plan was to actualize people who people who could be activated, which is you, which is me. This whole timeline crap of massaging the narrative. That's why I called out Kirill Dmitriev on Twitter, right? Because he's either a poser who is just using Q rhetoric and Sovereign Alliance rhetoric because it's popular on Twitter while simping for Anna Polina Luna, or he's playing these narrative games, these narrative progression games. And in my opinion, and I've made this point about Donald Trump many times, if you, in Trump's, like, you're Trump's centurions, right? You're his shock troopers. You're his Spartans. You're the ones who understand the vision that Donald Trump has espoused for the future better than anybody else in the world, right? If you're waiting and you don't want to push him in that direction, I think you're doing a disservice to that. I think you're actively holding the plan back if you're waiting for it to happen. Obviously, people watching this show, and including myself, can't create joint economic projects in the Arctic, right? Like, our power projection capabilities are very limited. I understand that. But on a cultural level, on a narrative level, that's why I started this show. That's why I talk about narrative all the time. You know, Badlands. I mean, look at John and Chris. Probably, on the internet, the two most infamous election reform guys in the world, maybe. Ash and CanCon obviously do their show about it, but when I say election reform, I'm talking about saying that our elections are fake, which they are. Which they are. And if you don't come to terms with that, then I don't think you're pushing the plan forward. I think you're holding the plan back because you're telling the white hats, you're telling anybody behind the plan that you're not ready for it. You can't handle the truth, right? That's what you're telling them. If you trust without verifying, if you trust without pushing, you are telling them, ironically, you are unworthy of that trust. You're unable to deal with it. You're unable to deal with the ramifications of it. So tonight's show made me think about that from a past lens, specifically on the Sovereign Alliance. And then this is a perfect example, so I'm going to call you out. Riv508, sorry, BB, but China's our biggest enemy. Xi may be working with the US, but the communist Chinese are intent on destroying us, period. China is not an ally of the United States. You might be a supporter and everything, but I'll go after co-hosts. I'll go after anybody that I think is saying something absolutely fucking stupid. That is the same exact dialectic and actual of the United States. Exact. How do you think the rest of the world, let's say people that are buying into Donald Trump's vision for the future in other countries, that other sovereign nations that believe in Donald Trump's vision for cooperative multipolarity, a golden age, etc. What do you think they think of Congress? What do you think they think of the American government? What do you think they think of a avowed communist, whatever you think of the movie we're watching, running the largest and most powerful city in the United States? Do you think they think that Donald Trump has control of America in the way that some people in this audience say he does? Obviously he doesn't. He doesn't have control of your neighbor. So this is the same thing going on with Russia and with China, where people in this audience can get cognitive dissonance and talk about the Patriot Plan and how America is going in the right direction while not applying that to the leaders of Russia and China, or they apply it to the leaders of Russia and China, but they're like, it doesn't matter, China's still the bad guy. Okay, by that logic, you have to say that America is still a bad guy, right? Because it's led by a sovereign leader, a sovereign alliance player in Donald Trump, but obviously 99% of Congress is our enemy. And I'm not calling for revolution. I'm saying an enemy of a sovereign republic. They're certainly not Republicans. There is certainly no such thing as a constitutional Republican in the United States right now in Congress. So you have to apply these things across the battle space. Chris Paul always says good twin, evil twin. Obviously, there's good twin, evil twin in the US. There is as well in China and in Russia. But just saying like China bad or Russia bad, it's the same thing as saying like Germany bad when you're talking about the globalist superstate. Yeah, the government, the leadership, but there's nationalists everywhere. Matt Ehret was talking tonight about the Alberta movement. Like most people in Alberta are super based and red-pilled. Is Canada our enemy? When you're saying Canada is our enemy, what are you talking about? Are you saying a globalist banker who sits in a seat of power on the board of the government of Canada is our enemy? Or the Canadian people are our enemy? Stop it with the X country is our enemy nonsense. It is infantile rhetoric, infantile thought patterns, and infantile behavior. Because all these countries could do the exact same thing with America. Well, I like Donald Trump, but America is bad. Like, okay, well, we're not going to get to where we need to go if that's what you think. So, don't know if that made any sense. It's actually not supposed to be a negative rant, but yeah. So that's what I think of the plan. I think the plan is very real, but I think that the Patriot plan, especially the Sovereign Alliance plan, is partially modeled on some of these plans that maybe didn't work in the past. Specifically, I'm thinking 1860s, US and Russia, and 1960s, actually, Kennedy Khrushchev. I think the 1960s worked in terms of avoiding World War III, but I don't think it got to where they wanted us to go. I'm optimistic that this time is going to be different, but I just think it's about having a more of an active mindset, even if that's just a rhetorical or a narrative or a cultural mindset. I think it's important to cultivate that. Take encouragement from the drops, take encouragement from Donald Trump, take encouragement from the fact that we have these sovereign leaders pushing in this direction, but push them in that direction. Show them, try to get ahead of them. Create a wake that leadership follows. Leadership. That's, Donald Trump is supposed to be a representative of the people, the ultimate representative. I refer to him as a cipher. You could call him, I think Chris Paul uses the word tribune all the time, right? A tribune, in my opinion, should not lead the people. He should follow the people. And that means the people have to be going somewhere, right? That's you. Tip of the spear. We hear that rhetoric out of Steve Bannon. We hear that out of Donald Trump. We hear that out of a lot of sovereign-minded thinkers, right? There's a reason that that's the analogy. It's not a tip of the shield wall. It's not tip of the tide. It's not the wave, right? It's not everybody get together in a line, wait for everybody to be on the same page in the awakening, and then we all move forward together. That's not how it works. That's not how humanity works. It works when there's one guy, and then two guys, and then three guys, and then four guys. And those people push so far ahead and so hard, even when they fuck up sometimes, like the Founding Fathers did, that they tear a hole in cultural and political space-time. They rip it to shreds. They tear a hole in the fabric of our paradigm, so much so that it can't be patched. And then they keep going. And then de facto, gravitationally, the people are forced to follow them in some order because they can't go back. That's what tip of the spear is supposed to mean. That's what power back to the people is supposed to mean. As I've said in my writing many times, you are the power patriots are trying to project, which means you need to act like it. And that does not mean voting harder in fake elections and then waiting for the plan to unfold. It means engaging with the plan, trying to understand the plan, trying to threat assess threats to the plan, many of which come from inside the house. And I think that's something we're all looking at right now within MAGA, the MAGA schism, MAGA being dead. MAGA is an ideology, it's a way of life, and you have to embody it. As long as you embody it, it doesn't die. Just like the Sovereign Alliance, just like the Sovereign Spirit. So that's my TED Talk, I guess. Hopefully it made a little bit of sense. Let me grab some rants before I get on out of here. I do have some boosts. Appreciate people. If you're watching on replay, go to badlandsmedia.tv/boost. You can select the narrative if you want to send something over for me to read next week. We've got, let me see where these are from. Squirrel 447. I saw that. Sent $100 last week, which I appreciate. We have Micro Toolmaker sent $222.22 to the narrative. Hey, BB, thanks for everything you do for us. Where we go on, we go all. Thank you, Micro. And hope you got your book. Hope all you guys, or most of you guys, got your book. I've been getting a kick out of seeing all the pictures of it online. Seems like Mrs. Bright's packaging skills were truly next level, because so far I haven't had a single complaint about damages or anything like that. We were nervous shipping a 2.5 pound leather book through the postal service. But if that's an indicator of where the golden age is going, that the postal service can be trusted right now with that kind of book, that might be a bit of a positive proof there. Got a few came over from Brogiant, who said, Chapter 10, Red Path, Swordpunk reads like a BB writing while in a state of euphoria. Swordpunk leaves you wanting more after each page. Only BB could write a paragraph that's 8 lines long, and 5 of them are 1 sentence. Thank you, Brogiant. I didn't pay him for that, by the way. In fact, he paid me to say that. Swordpunk is my my shortest book that I've written, and it's not that verbose. So actually, I'm getting a lot of people saying like they can't believe how snappy it is because of how not snappy I usually am. So if you're into that kind of thing, for anybody who's been asking about like where can you buy a physical book, this was a limited run of the leatherbound book. There may be another one in a year and a half. If I do a sequel, I will do another print run of the leatherbound books. The logistics are tough. The expense is extraordinary. So we're not going to just print them on demand. There's too much that goes into a leather book like this. But if I do a sequel, I will do another print run of the first one as well, for anybody who missed it. For everybody else who just wants to read the book or listen to it, February or March is the goal of digital Swordpunk Saving Soul. The audio production, I think a lot of you guys being podcast fans are going to love. Brad and Abby have both listened to it. Zach is going to be listening to it soon. It is a full production. It's like a audio movie with a cast of actors, original music, sound effects. It's going to be some good shit. So I'll keep you guys posted on when that's coming around. He sent a couple more over. Akio Prince is a man of the people through his actions. BB can't even show love to his book funders who promote their copy in the Twitter sphere. I'll be honest with you, Brojan, and I did show love to this tweet after the fact. I don't look at my replies or mentions on Twitter. I just straight up don't. First of all, I can't because there's a lot of them, which sounds like a humble brag, but it's not meant to be. But second of all, we have been being harassed by a coordinated social and lawfare campaign now that you guys are aware of for quite a while, and people just harass us all the time, which I don't care. It doesn't bother me, but I'm not going to like read it day in and day out with these sock accounts. So anyway, this is it. This is the copy of Swordpunk. Appreciate that, man. Appreciate the support. Also said last boost may have received a BB combative response. I'll find out while listening tomorrow. I stand by it for us proles, especially after Chris Paul let it slip. We got the generic signature. All joking. Love Swordpunk BB. Ready for book 2. There is a plan for book 2. There is a plan for it. It all depends on how book 1 digital does. But on that note, I want to debunk a rumor about the signatures on the Swordpunk books. If your book was not dedicated to you, it's because you didn't request that it be dedicated to you in the survey that Mrs. Bright sent out about the book. I didn't dedicate the books to the people who bought them because many of them are giving them as gifts. So the generic signature was a joke. Every book was signed. Some books were dedicated and signed. So that's it. Rants, Tom Terrific, $25. Happy Turkey Week. Happy Thanksgiving to everybody. The last show before Thanksgiving. Should be fun. Thank you, Tom. Makes sense to me too. I got my book yesterday, 4 chapters deep. I was hoping for the price that at least the quality of the book itself was good, and it didn't disappoint. Nice leather, raised cover text, thick pages. Nice. Thickest pages you can bind into a leather-bound book, actually. Yeah, man. It would surprise you guys how low the profit margin is on a $75 book. But there's a reason I did a collector's edition, signed it, made it leather. I wanted to do something different. And I will be actually disclosing, not that I have to, but I will actually be disclosing the financials around the Swordpunk project in the weeks ahead, just to let you guys know kind of what went into it, what I got out of it, and what I'm using some of those profits for. The narrative, what we got? John in Connecticut, $20. There is no better analysis and discussion of current events in historical context anywhere. Thank you, BB and Matt. Thank you, John. Even though Connecticut is the lamest state in the union. But I bet you're not the lamest, John. Low potty. Why BB nose red like that? Nervous twitch. No, it's not a nervous twitch. It's, well, people can think it is. Apparently I touch my nose a lot. The reason for that is my nose has been broken 4 times. And the 4th time I did not get it fixed because I assumed I was going to keep fighting. And when I went in for the procedure again, the doctor said, "Are you going to keep fighting, you idiot?" I said, "Yes." And he was like, "Well, then come back when you know that you're done." But I've just put it off for like 12 years of the surgery that I need. That's why I touch my nose often, because it hurts most of the time. Lopat, $50. The Narrative, monthly with Matt Ehret. Excellent dialogue, guys. I think Matt, that would kill Matt. No, Matt's a busy guy. I like the variety of voices. I love having Matt on, but he will for sure be a guest regularly going forward as long as he wants to. Always interesting stuff there. Chickasaw Girl received my book yesterday, BB. Thanks, Mrs. Bright, for packaging so well. Bad storms were happening. The book is beautiful. Oh, great. We were wondering how it would do in the wet. Alisi, $10. Thank you, BB. God bless you and your family. Thank you. And Mindy Q, I didn't get mine yet. Hopefully we can still get it. If you ordered it, you mean? If you ordered it, it should be coming. Not all of them have delivered. We sent them out in 2 batches. I would expect they will all basically be delivered by Wednesday. If this week goes by and you haven't gotten it, just email us. realmrsbright@gmail.com is the email for this project. If you send anything else, we're going to ignore it for this project. But yeah, we can track everybody's books so we can see where it is and all that kind of stuff. But don't freak out until this week has gone by because there's a bunch that haven't delivered yet. And what else do I have? Is that it? I just wanted to leave you guys with an appeal again. Go to burningbright.substack.com if you are interested in some of the writing that flows out of these shows or flows into these shows. Today I published a feature called Heralds of the Golden Age on the Prince of Futures Past. I sort of tiptoed into ghost territory here. Usually I write about the US, Donald Trump, Russia, Putin, and China with Xi Jinping. Every once in a while, I tiptoe into the Saudi Arabia area, but this is probably my most extensive piece on Mohammed bin Salman, the Saudis. The Q drops factor into this with the Saudi purge, the plan to save the world. If you want to feel good about where we're going on the back of Trump's summit with Mohammed bin Salman last week, give this one a read and then watch Ghost shows and Matt shows. This one is a little bit of a break from the narrative, and it's all about the actuals that are happening between the US and Saudi Arabia and how encouraging that is for the future of the Golden Age and for that vision. So if you guys want to read that, check it out. And shout out to everybody who, I guess I shouldn't be surprised, But the Temple Trap that I published last week is the most read feature of 2025. And this is, basically a Batman on Donald Trump and the League of Shadows. Batman analogs. The myth of Donald Trump. By the way, I'm an official Q influencer, according to NPR. So I've got that going for me. And people loved this one. My most shared, most read of the year. So I appreciate that. And anybody who supports this work is very greatly appreciated. And also, badlands.substack.com. Subscribe. It's free. Get the news brief every day. Get original features from guys like Matt Ehret. Otherwise, I'm going to outro with the intro, and I will raid you guys into the Q show. Are they waiting for me? I hope they're not waiting for me and being polite. They should just start. Brad, if you're watching, you should never wait for me. That's not a good move. But I will outro with the intro. As I always say, the war is a story. The story is a war. I think G-Money is joining me next week. Don't run away. Don't be a pussy. It's going to be a good discussion and probably way more interesting than you think, just like the last one with G-Money was. There's a lot of really interesting stuff going on that is not just plan adjacent, but is wrapped in the plan in the financial realm. And I think we're going to have a good show about that right after Thanksgiving. The war is a story. The story is a war. Act accordingly. I will see you next week.
We were sleeping. I've been sleeping. I've been turning away from a truth I wanted not to face. There is a wound that won't heal at the center of the galaxy. There is a darkness reaching like rust into everything around us. We let it grow, and now it's here.
How many men have you killed, Malone?
I don't know.
50? 100? Countless.
Countless has a nice ring to it.
And how many lives have you saved?
500,000. Population of King's Landing. Tell me if your precious Randy commanded you to kill your own father and stand by while thousands of men, women, children burned alive, would you have done it? Would you have kept your oath then?
Our time has come. We prepared. We grew stronger. Were you rested in your cradle of power? You were trusted to lead the Republic. But you were deceived. You assumed no force could challenge you. And now, finally, we have returned.
The visions are clear now. I see possible futures all at once. Our enemies are all around us. And in so many futures they prevail. But I do see a way. There is a narrow way through.
It's not a prophecy. It's a story that you keep telling, but it's not their story, it's yours. They deserve to be led by one of their own. What your people did to this world is heartbreaking.
We gave them something to hope for.
That's not hope!
We have survived by hiding from them, by running from them. But they are the gatekeepers. They are guarding all the doors, they are holding all the keys, which means that sooner or later, someone is going to have to fight them.
I wish none of this had happened.
So do all who live to see such time, but that is not for them to decide. All we will have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us.
Forgive me. I did not see. I have failed you all.
You fought bravely. Kept your honor. I do not know what strength is like that. But I swear to you, I will not let the White City fall. Our people fail. Our people. Our people.
I wish you good fortune in the wars to come.
And now it begins.
No. Now it ends.